On March 22, 1987, the lifeless body of 28-year-old Derby Wagner-Richardson was discovered in the trunk of her own car, shocking her community. Derby, a security guard, had been forcibly removed from her workplace, Steiberg Engineering. During a violent struggle, her throat and her wrists were really in a bad condition. For over a decade, the killer of a young woman evaded capture. It took an astonishing 37 years before the man responsible for her untimely death was finally brought to justice. This is the haunting story of a lively, energetic woman whose life was tragically cut short. Her murder left behind a mystery that confused investigators for years as they tried to figure out who killed her. What motivated someone to carry out such a brutal attack on Derby, a lively and compassionate person well loved by her friends and community? How was the perpetrator able to avoid justice for 37 years, despite leaving footprints at the crime scene? Let's look into the details of this mystery. Born on May 2, 1958, at Bosco Bell, Grant County, Wisconsin, Derby, at the age of 16, married Fred Wagner-Richardson, and they had 2 daughters together. She worked 3 jobs, including at a nursing center in Kenosha and as a YWCA instructor in Racine, to give her daughters the best life. Despite facing domestic violence in her marriage to Fred, she stayed for their children. However, the abuse worsened, and for her and her children's safety, Derby decided to leave Fred in June 1986 and filed for divorce in December. Derby Wagner-Richardson was working as a third-shift security guard at Steiberg Engineering. On a typical night of March 22, 1987, when she failed to check in at her usual time of 1 a.m., the company management immediately grew concerned and contacted the Racine Police Department to report her as a missing person. Her co-workers at Steiberg Engineering sensed something was wrong, but they could not have imagined the true gravity of the situation unfolding. When the investigators arrived at the workplace of Derby, she was nowhere to be found. They found many pieces of evidence suggesting she had been taken against her will after a struggle. Little did anyone know at the time that the gruesome fate that awaited Derby was about to unfold. On a typical morning of March 22, 1987, at around 8:30 a.m., just a few hours after Derby was reported missing, her car was discovered in an alley near Layard Avenue, just north of Steiberg. In a shocking discovery, when police opened the trunk of her car, they found the victim's lifeless body. She was nude with white duct tape gagging her mouth. Her throat and wrist had been badly slashed, almost resulting in decapitation, highlighting the severity of the assault. The following day, authorities found Derby's scattered clothes along the street. These included her tan uniform, security badge, and a shoulder patch from her uniform and a brown shoe.
Search parties were out on the west side of Racine today, looking for clues, for evidence, perhaps a murder weapon. They had little luck. Still missing are the tan or brown uniform pants Derby Richardson was wearing, her keys, and possibly a purse.
Yesterday, police found many clues. They found personal papers belonging to the woman strewn along the side of the road as if someone had tossed them out of a car. Police say they also found a security guard patch that looked as if it had been ripped off of her shirt. Now, these items were found on Spring Street in between Island and Loguercio, the opposite side of town from where the woman's body was found.
Investigators also found a pair of black and red bolt cutters at the crime scene. Despite DNA analysis not being widely known at the time, all evidence was well preserved. A medical examiner later concluded that the injury to her head was probably caused by the bolt cutters. The thorough investigation started. The investigators determined that robbery was not the motive, as the victim's jewelry remained intact. Furthermore, there were no signs of sexual assault found during the examination of the crime scene.
We realized that the victim was not killed at the location she was found. So if there's a substantial amount of blood in a confined area, this would be the crime scene. And we're asking anybody, if they do find an area that looks like this, to give us a call.
Police say Derby Richardson had worked as a security guard for the past 8 months. The mother of 2, she was separated from her husband. An autopsy report shows that Derby Richardson had her throat cut. There was no evidence of sexual assault, but there were cuts on her arms as if she tried to protect herself. Police are also investigating reports that Richardson had been threatened the past few months.
We have also received the information that she did receive threats, and at this time we are checking them out.
Racine police are asking that you call them with any information or evidence. Right now, they can find no suspect and no motive.
A pair of bolt cutters found at the crime scene suggested that the suspect had used them to gain entry to the Steiberg Engineering property. Crime scene photographs revealed a shoe print on the property with a pointed toe, resembling a type of cowboy boot. These pieces of physical evidence indicated that the suspect had cut through a section of the chain-link fence along the east side of the property to access the premises. The bolt cutters and the distinctive shoe print provided investigators with important clues about how the suspect had entered the scene. According to the investigation, Derby had a routine of bringing her children's laundry to work to fold. She would often park her car near the lunchroom door to easily carry the laundry basket back and forth. It seemed the perpetrator was waiting for Derby and attacked her during one of these trips. Her jacket was found with the sleeves turned inside out, suggesting a struggle had taken place. Examination revealed the assailant had tried to grab Derby from behind. However, Derby was able to break free and flee towards a nearby office, locking herself inside. Marks on the office door showed someone, likely wearing a denim jacket, had repeatedly rammed the door with their shoulder in an attempt to get to Derby. In the end, the assailant was able to overpower Derby and knock her unconscious. They then taped her mouth shut with duct tape before taking her, most likely in the trunk of her own car. The main suspect in Derby Wagner-Richardson's murder was her husband, Fred Wagner-Richardson. Their marriage had been violent, with Fred physically hurting Derby many times. Just a couple of months before the murder in January 1987, Fred allegedly strangled Derby in front of their daughter, making her pass out. He also punched her so hard that he broke his own hand. Investigators found out that just 12 hours before Derby's brutal attack, she and her husband Fred met with her lawyers to finalize their divorce. This meeting, which involved a heated discussion about the settlement, seemed to be a major tipping point. Fred stood to lose a significant portion of his income and assets, including half of their properties and 25% of the rental income, totaling around $250,000. The discussion upset Fred so much that Derby's attorney requested extra protection from her from the authorities. The financial stakes involved in the divorce proceedings appear to have been a key factor that exacerbated the conflict between Derby and Fred in the final hours before her horrific death. However, despite suspicions about Fred's involvement, investigators were unable to find sufficient evidence to charge him with murder. The case eventually went cold, leaving Derby's family without closure. Unfortunately, the search for Derby's murderer didn't reveal any leads. By the end of the year, detectives couldn't charge anyone with the crime, and the case became unsolved and forgotten. They preserved all the collected evidence with care, hoping that advancements in technology might open up new possibilities for testing and analysis. Sadly, after Derby was murdered, her case remained unsolved for 37 years. Even though there were signs of a struggle and long-standing suspicions about Derby's husband, Fred Wagner-Richardson, being involved, the police had no evidence linking him to the crime. But on March 28, 2024, police searched Fred's home following a tip that he, as a felon, possessed firearms. They found 4 handguns and 2 tasers.
Years and 6 days after Derby Wagner-Richardson's body was found, Racine police say they executed a search warrant at Frederick Wagner-Richardson's properties, including this building off of Mound Avenue. And inside, police say they found a set of bolt cutters identical to those found in the days after Derby's death and those that Frederick bought the month after she died.
Additionally, they recovered a pair of bolt cutters that matched the ones from the 1987 crime scene, and a pair he had bought shortly after Derby's death. So Fred was arrested on March 28, 2024, after the Racine police allegedly recovered firearms. However, when he was arrested for new charges of illegal firearm possession, authorities were able to reopen Derby's murder case. Former Texas prosecutor Kelly Siegler and cold justice regular homicide investigator Steve Spingola teamed up with the Racine Police Department in Wisconsin to investigate Derby's death once again. The investigator hoped to finally unravel the enduring mystery that had haunted them for so long. Investigators said that the possible motive to kill Derby was that Fred Wagner-Richardson was especially angry about losing income from his rental properties because of the divorce. Investigators also said that 83-year-old Fred Wagner-Richardson was always the main suspect in his wife's murder. They believed they had a motive to kill Derby Wagner-Richardson after several years of a troubled marriage. The cold justice investigation included interviews with many of Derby's friends and co-workers. One of these was Kelly Williams-Cherry, who had watched Derby's children on the night of her murder. She told investigators that every time she left the house, she'd always say, "Please, under no circumstances, if he ever comes over here, do not open the door for Fred. I don't want him nowhere near the girls." Investigators also found out that Fred reportedly made statements about his whereabouts when his estranged wife died that turned out to be false. He told one friend he would be occupied with his children over the weekend, but it was actually Derby's turn to have them. He also told another friend he was sick in bed all weekend, which was inconsistent with other evidence. This renewed investigation into Derby Wagner-Richardson's murder in 1987 ultimately resulted in new charges being filed against the suspect. Despite being the prime suspect in Derby's murder for nearly 37 years, Wagner-Richardson was never charged until now. Fred Wagner-Richardson was 18 years older than Derby and the father of her 2 daughters. By the age of 30, Fred had a lengthy criminal record, allegedly joining the U.S. military under a false name. He was dishonorably discharged after attacking and robbing someone, leading to a prison sentence. After moving to Racine, he was convicted of 2 more robberies, but served only part of a 15-year sentence. This pattern of violence and criminal behavior was a sign of the troubles to come in his relationship with Derby. Fred Wagner-Richardson, an 83-year-old man, had been charged with first-degree murder for the 1987 killing of his estranged wife, Derby Wagner-Richardson. He will face a potential life sentence if convicted of this murder charge. In addition to the murder charge, Fred also faced several other felony charges in a separate pending case. These include 4 counts of possession of a firearm by a felon and 2 counts of possession of an electronic weapon. He made his initial court appearance on these charges on April 1, 2024. Prosecutors asked for a $1 million bail for Fred Wagner-Richardson. The court commissioner set it at $50,000 cash and a $50,000 signature bond. Despite the serious nature of the charges, Fred was released from custody after posting the $50,000 bond. He is expected to appear in court again for a preliminary hearing on April 10, 2024. The decision to grant bail, even on such a serious charge, was likely based on Wagner-Richardson's advanced age and the length of time that had passed since the alleged crime. However, this has raised concerns among Derby Wagner-Richardson's family and the broader community about the potential risk of allowing the suspect to remain free. The arrest and charges against Fred Wagner-Richardson for the 1987 murder of his wife Derby represent the resolution of a long-standing mystery. This development demonstrates the unwavering dedication of law enforcement to keep their community safe and solve even the most challenging cold cases. Derby's aunt, Ellie Schmidt, expressed deep gratitude to the investigators for finally bringing closure to the family after over 37 years.
Ideally, it would be my sister, Ruth, standing here. She fought so hard and for so long to get justice for her daughter's murder that I can speak for our entire family in expressing deep gratitude to everyone who was involved in making it possible for us to be here today.
After over 37 years, investigators were able to build a strong case against Fred, the primary suspect from the beginning. Their tireless efforts to re-examine the evidence and pursue new leads allowed them to finally bring charges against the 83-year-old for Derby's brutal murder. As the case of Derby's murder finds some closure after many years, we reflect on the emotion that this revelation stirs. Cases like Derby Wagner-Richardson's murder demonstrate just how difficult it can be to solve cold cases, even with a thorough initial investigation. It also emphasizes the need for justice and closure for the victims' families and the community. Cases like Derby's serve as a sobering reminder that justice is not always swift, but that law enforcement will never give up on seeking answers, even in the face of immense challenges.
A nightmare unfolded in Pensacola on August 26, 1998. Former soldier Stephen Davis, who moonlighted as a cab driver, became the target of a brutal attack. After a shopping trip at the Winn-Dixie, he approached his yellow cab unaware of the danger lurking inside. Gunshots shattered the early morning quiet, leaving Stephen dead and the community reeling. The identity of the attacker and the motive for the killing vanished into thin air. Years passed with no answers, turning this case into a chilling reminder of a life lost and a crime left unsolved. But who was the mysterious assailant? Why was Stephen targeted? To completely understand this case, investigators had to go into the specifics of the horrifying murder scene that day. On August 26, 1998, 46-year-old ex-Army veteran Stephen Davis was ready to head back home after doing some shopping at a Winn-Dixie store on Navy Boulevard in Pensacola. He was a taxi dispatcher in addition to being the owner of an ancient yellow cab. He headed in ready to drive, but what happened next would completely change his life. He was unaware that there was already someone waiting for him inside his taxi. Then, gunfire would kill him as he got into his car at around 4 a.m. 3 gunshots came from behind him, one after the other. Nevertheless, he held on to life and refused to give up. He fought his way out of the automobile and attempted to run back across the parking lot to the Winn-Dixie. But as his sense of hope faded, he stumbled, fell, and finally passed away from his wounds. Although it appeared to be a well-planned attack, tracking down the person responsible for this homicide would not be a simple task. Upon arriving at the site, the police examined Stephen's body and discovered that he had sustained 2 bullet wounds to his right posterior thorax and 1 to his jaw. It was evident that Stephen had passed away shortly after his fall in the parking lot. Now, when the police went through Navy Boulevard for information, they came across Stephen's fully abandoned taxi. The cab's driver's side window was smashed, and the rear passenger doors and driver's door were both open. A blood-stained fingerprint was found at the crime scene by the forensic team. The proof was brought to the department so that tests could be conducted. The blood was identified as belonging to Stephen Davis, but their database did not include a match for the fingerprint. Under the direction of Sheriff Chip Simmons, the Escambia County Sheriff's Office investigated the Stephen Davis investigation with determination. They performed 3 separate DNA analyses in the hopes of discovering a match in the criminal database. But sadly, none of them produced any findings. The incident in the Winn-Dixie parking lot was caught on security tape, which only made matters more frustrating. Unfortunately, the video's poor quality or lack of distinct characteristics made it difficult to identify the offender. These efforts did not make the trail any warmer. The taxi firm Stephen worked for closed for the day so that everyone could attend his funeral in honor of him. Numerous taxis were arranged in line along the roads leading to the location of the burial. A thorough leaflet that was distributed in the days after the murder gave a very accurate description of a man who was spotted in the immediate area at the time of the crime. The man was also identified on the brochure as someone who was applying for or had already worked at a local company. However, this drew no responses. The Escambia County Sheriff's Office, despite Sheriff Chip Simmons' determined efforts, hit a wall. DNA analysis produced no matches in criminal databases, and the grainy security footage offered no leads. Exhausted by all avenues, they were forced to shelve the case as unsolved. For over 2 decades, Stephen Davis's murder remained a cold case, a chilling reminder of a life lost. However, in 2023, a glimmer of hope emerged. The Escambia County Sheriff's Office, determined to revisit these unsolved mysteries, assembled a team of more than 20 retired investigators. Perhaps their fresh eyes and experience could crack the code in this long-dormant case. The Stephen Davis case was one of the 4 cases. And now, 25 years later, the investigators have achieved a breakthrough. In early 2024, after reopening the Stephen Davis case, the authorities were able to match the bloody fingerprint through testing conducted with advanced technology. A man by the name of Donald Holmes II was taken into custody for a home invasion and robbery in Escambia County back in 2012. In 2014, he was given a 20-year prison sentence with the intention of being freed in 2032. The fingerprint from that fateful day belonged to none other than Donald Holmes II. Holmes would have been only 18 years old in 1998 when he allegedly shot and killed Davis. The Escambia County Sheriff's Office announced on March 5, 2024, in the morning, that they will be charging Donald Holmes II with the murder, since the matter is still being investigated. When the arrest was made public, Stephen's 2 sisters, who are still living, shared their thoughts.
I'm glad you enjoyed your freedom. But now, you're going to be thinking about this till God takes you home.
Regarding the start of the trial, neither the police nor the prosecution have given any new information. The murder of Stephen Davis serves as an example of the never-ending quest for justice. Years of dead ends eventually came to an end because of the Escambia County Sheriff's Office's dedication to closure and technological developments. Stephen's family will have an opportunity to move on after Donald Holmes II's arrest in 2024. Even though the legal process is still going on, this case is a reminder that, despite decades of unresolved concerns, hope for a solution remains possible. On a warm summer morning on May 12, 1972, hoping for a good catch, a fisherman set out for a stroll through a marshy area near Winter Haven, Florida. As he walked through the area, something strange in the field caught his eye. After leaning in for a closer look, his eyes widened as he was stunned to see human skeletal remains. This eerie find turned a peaceful morning into the start of a mystery that would haunt the town for the next 51 years. The fisherman quickly alerted the local authorities of Winter Haven about his grim discovery. Investigators rushed to the scene in the remote marshy area on the south side of Winter Haven, Florida, just east of Tampa. As soon as they arrived, they began the arduous task of piecing together the mystery of whose remains these were and how they ended up in the water. Along with the investigators, a team of forensic examiners was also on site, carefully examining the bones. After a thorough inspection, they determined that the remains belonged to a man between the ages of 40 and 50. The skeletal structure suggested that the man had been a strong and vigorous individual, weighing around 180 pounds and standing 6 feet tall. However, it was challenging to gather much information on the spot, as the man was found with no wallet or ID, and forensic science in the 1970s was still developing. To get more answers, the remains were sent to the medical examiner for an autopsy to determine the cause of death. Meanwhile, the investigators stayed at the scene, combing through the area for more clues and evidence. Despite the advanced state of decomposition, which had erased much of the evidence that might have revealed the man's identity, the medical examiner managed to uncover crucial details about his final moments. A forensic autopsy revealed that the man had suffered 2 gunshot wounds to the head, indicating a violent end, and leaving no doubt that he had been murdered. However, there was a significant challenge. The man had no distinguishing features, and there were no records that could immediately identify him. This presented a daunting task for the investigators, as they now had to piece together the mystery of his identity and the events leading up to his tragic demise without any clear leads. While efforts to establish the victim's identity continued, investigators who were still at the scene discovered some belongings that were believed to be of the victim. They found a light-colored short-sleeved cotton shirt, dark blue trousers, leather dress shoes, and dark-colored socks. Despite these findings, the items didn't prove any specific details that could help identify the victim. The lack of advanced DNA testing technology at that time made it more difficult to extract any useful genetic information from the clothes. So, realizing the potential for future advancements, they carefully preserved these items for later testing. Authorities then pursued other avenues in their quest as they meticulously reviewed missing persons files, hoping to find a match based on his features. But each search ended in frustration. They also turned to the local community for answers, interviewing residents near the remote area where the remains were discovered. However, no one had seen or heard of the man fitting the victim's description, nor had anyone noticed anything suspicious or out of the ordinary during that time. As the investigation reached a critical juncture, in a final effort, they entered comprehensive details of the case into the National Missing and Unidentified Person System, or NamUs, under the case number of UP9508. This move was pivotal, as it aimed to harness future advancements in technology and forensic science. It also served as a beacon, hoping that someone with information about the victim would come forward and provide the vital clues needed to bring closure to the case. Despite relentless efforts by law enforcement, no new details emerged, and the community and investigators were left with haunting questions. Who was he? How did he come into such a secluded area? And most importantly, who was responsible for his murder? With no leads or witnesses, the investigation couldn't move forward, and the case went cold. The unidentified man was laid to rest as John Doe in Lakeside Memorial Cemetery in Winter Haven. It seemed as if this case was destined to remain unsolved, with the file gathering dust on the shelf. However, things took a surprising turn in January of 1974, when Charles Williams, an inmate at a Florida state prison, became pivotal in reopening the case. Williams, possibly seeking leniency for himself or driven by his conscience, contacted detectives from the Polk County Sheriff's Office. He claimed to have information that could shed light on the case. According to Williams, during his time at Rayford Prison, he had befriended another inmate named Clarence Ingram, a connection that could potentially unravel the long-standing mysteries surrounding the unidentified man found in the marshlands. During their conversations, Ingram had revealed chilling details about a crime he had committed alongside a man named Edgar Todd. Ingram confided to Williams that one night in 1972, they had met a man in a bar in Winter Haven. After sharing some drinks and conversation, they left the bar with him in the man's white Chevrolet. As they drove through the quiet night, an argument broke out, which quickly escalated into drunken violence. In a fit of rage, they shot that man twice in the head, To cover their tracks, they decided to dispose of the body in a remote field near a canal in Eloise, believing the turtles would consume the remains and leave no trace of their heinous act. Ingram had also revealed that they had found tools worth between $1,000 and $1,500 in the victim's vehicle, which they sold to Ingram's brother, Johnny Ingram. After that, the pair drove the car to Keeler, Michigan, where they sold it for $500. Williams' account included specific details that piqued the interest of detectives, particularly the mention of the vehicle having a Georgia license plate. This piece of information prompted investigators to cross-check missing persons reports from Georgia around the time of the incident. However, they soon hit a roadblock. The lack of advanced forensic technology at the time made it impossible to make definitive connections. Despite having a promising lead, they couldn't make any headway. The investigators' hopes were dashed, and the case, once again, went cold. It seemed like the case would never be solved. With no identity for the victim, the case had been closed for decades. However, in February of 2017, a renewed effort would change the course of the investigation. After 44 years, at the order of the court, the victim's body was exhumed to obtain a DNA sample, reigniting hope that modern forensic techniques could finally unravel the mystery. The exhumation was conducted with precision, and DNA extracted from the remains was sent to the University of North Texas, a leading institution in forensic science. Investigators collaborated with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation to collect reference samples from the families in Georgia who matched the physical description of the John Doe, hoping for a breakthrough. They believed that if the victim were connected to these families, it would provide them with a solid lead. However, the test results showed that the victim didn't connect with any of the families. This was a significant but disappointing development, as it meant the search for John Doe's true identity had to continue. The victim's DNA was also entered into the Combined DNA Index System, or CODIS, but no matching profiles emerged, leaving his identity to be a mystery once again. Would investigators ever solve this long-standing cold case? In September of 2023, investigators decided to leverage the latest advancements in forensic genetic genealogy, a method that had successfully solved numerous cold cases in recent years. A part of the victim's femur bone was sent to the Othram Lab, a private facility known for its cutting-edge forensic work. The lab's analysis began with the meticulous extraction and sequencing of DNA from the femur bone. Geneticists compared this DNA to profiles in public databases, seeking matches that could provide clues about the victim's ancestry and familial connections. In May of 2024, Othram provided detectives with the breakthrough they had been waiting for. Their report suggested that the unidentified victim could be Mack Lavell Proctor. This potential identification was based on extensive forensic genetic genealogy analysis, bringing investigators closer to solving the long-standing mystery. Armed with this new information, investigators reached out to Mack's son, Wright Proctor. Wright confirmed that his father was seen by family between 1969 and 1972 in Georgia for the last time. This crucial confirmation brought the investigators one step closer to finally solving the case and bringing closure to the case that had lingered for over half a century. On May 5, 2024, detectives confirmed that Wright was indeed the biological son of Mack Lavell. This identification marked a monumental step forward, finally bringing long-awaited answers to the case. Wright provided additional context about his father's life, mentioning that Mack was a master mechanic, known for his gentle nature and skilled craftsmanship. Mack Lavell Proctor was born on November 28, 1914, and his talent for fixing anything with an engine made him a beloved figure in his community. However, it all took a tragic turn when he mysteriously disappeared. Strangely, Mack was never formally reported as missing to law enforcement, leaving a gaping void in the records and complicating efforts to investigate his case. His family, perhaps due to a combination of fear, confusion, and the social norms at that time, did not reach out to the authorities. With Mack's identity confirmed, detectives now had new avenues to explore in their quest to bring his killers to justice. They could re-examine the evidence and leads with fresh eyes and a clearer understanding of who the killer was. Mack's family shared numerous details with authorities, revealing that he would have likely carried his tools with him in his vehicle. This information intriguingly matched the earlier account provided by prisoner Charles Williams, who had recounted that Clarence Ingram and Edgar Todd had sold the victim's tools after the murder. This connection provided a crucial link between Mack's disappearance and the chilling confession of the two criminals. With Mack's identity now confirmed, investigators intensified their efforts to build a case against Clarence and Edgar. The consistency between Charles Williams' prison confession and the new evidence bolstered detectives' confidence that they were on the right track. The connection between the white Chevrolet with a Georgia license plate, which his family confirmed was Mack's, further solidified their case. As part of the cold case unit's thorough investigation into Mack's death, detectives delved deep into the background of Ingram and Edgar. However, their findings proved deeply disappointing. Edgar Todd, who was believed to have shot Mack and disposed of his body, had passed away in 2015. Clarence Ingram, his accomplice in the crime, had died even earlier in 1995. This revelation meant that both key suspects directly involved in Mack's murder were deceased and would never face the prosecution. Further investigation uncovered that Clarence's brother, Johnny Ingram, who had allegedly purchased the stolen tools from Todd and Ingram, had also passed away in 2003. This information closed off another avenue for the authorities in obtaining crucial testimony or additional evidence that could have linked the suspects directly to the crime. The inability to bring Clarence and Todd to trial was a significant blow, especially for Mack's family, who had longed for justice. Despite this setback, the identification of Mack's remains and the uncovering of the circumstances surrounding his death provided a sense of closure for his loved ones. Knowing the truth about Mack's fate, albeit without legal repercussions for the perpetrators, allowed the family to begin healing after enduring decades of uncertainty and pain.
Decades later, an accused killer has been caught in the oldest known murder out of Gresham.
In January 1980, Barbara Tucker, a 19-year-old sophomore studying business at Mount Hood Community College in Gresham, had a terrifying encounter on her way to an evening class. Barbara emerged abruptly from a dense wooded area along Northeast Kane Drive. Many cars had to quickly turn or stop to avoid hitting her, and one car almost did hit her. Barbara had mud and blood on her face. She waved her arms to try to get cars to stop and help her, but no one stopped. Then a strange man came out of the forest. He grabbed Brenda's arm and pulled her back into the trees. Some people who saw this later told the police that they thought it was college students playing around or playing a game in traffic. The following morning, a student on his way to class discovered Brenda's body in the bushes. She was partially clothed and had been assaulted and killed. The identity of the strange man who abducted her remains unknown. For over 4 decades, many, including Barbara's siblings, believed he would never be caught. Who was this mysterious man? What was his connection to Barbara? And how was he finally apprehended? On February 25, 1960, in Portland, Oregon, Louise and Albert Tucker had a baby girl, Barbara Mae Tucker. She was the youngest of 7 children. Barbie, as her family affectionately called her, was known for her strength, height, and athleticism, which she demonstrated on the basketball court at Cleveland High School. She was not only great at sports, but she also did very well in school. She won awards in national competitions through a club for students who liked business and retail. During the summers, she worked at Sears.
She was going to go places. I mean, she was planning to get a degree in business at the college.
Family and friends described her as goofy and ambitious. She was the first girl to attend college in the Tucker family. Barbara loved writing songs, poems, and playing her guitar. She dreamed of opening her own craft supply shop one day after she got a business degree. Despite being the Tucker family's baby, Barbara grew up independent. After completing high school, Barbara moved to Gresham, where she began attending Mount Hood Community College. Sadly, Barbara's life was taken away soon at the age of 19. Barbara had an evening consumer credits practices class on January 15, 1980. She had informed her mother that she would spend some time with her friends after finishing the class the following night. Witnesses saw Barbara running onto Northeast Kane Drive from the wooded area on the west edge of campus. They told she was waving at anybody, trying to get people's attention. However, no one stopped. A witness recalled seeing a man lead Barbara back into the wooded area. There was no more information until Barbara was found dead in the forest. She was partially naked, and her purse and books were found next to her. The police quickly arrived at the scene, and a medical examiner determined that she had been physically assaulted and beaten to death. The investigation began, but there were no crucial leads. Even police proceedings with the witnesses brought no results in this case. No one could remember what the strange man looked like. Time went by. Barbara's case began to freeze over, and her loved one struggled to move on.
Has told me that there was a day that goes by in the past 44 years that not one day that she doesn't think about Barbie.
Barbara's father, Albert Tucker, was deeply affected by her death. According to her siblings, they saw their father cry for the first time upon hearing the news. In the weeks, months, and years that followed, Albert continued to grieve visibly for his daughter. Whenever Barbara's name was brought up, he would leave the room. Sadly, Albert passed away in 1989, without ever finding closure for the loss of his beloved daughter. Barbara's mother, Louise Tucker, expressed her grief and hurt differently. She held on to everything Barbara left behind. She bought a single yellow rose and planted it in the family's home garden. Louise would write letters to the Multnomah County District Attorney's Office often. Norm Frink was the chief deputy of the Multnomah County District Attorney's Office, who was in charge of the case in the 1980s. Norm mentioned how frequently Louise wrote to the office, and how frustrated he felt because the case did not seem to be going anywhere. Louise passed away in 1995, but till she died, she never forgave herself. She believed that the reason this happened to Barbara was because she had let her move to Gresham for college. It had been raining in the evening of January 15, 1980, and the Tuckers believed Barbara had gotten a ride from a stranger to get to campus. Louise often wondered aloud if Barbara had attended a college closer to home, perhaps she wouldn't have gotten into a stranger's car. She believed that if one of her siblings had dropped Barbara off, she would still be alive today. Barbara's childhood best friend, Maria Adrian, was deeply impacted by Barbara's murder. As Maria married and became a mother, she couldn't help but imagine Barbara experiencing the same milestones. She anxiously awaited each stage in her children's lives, hoping they would reach the accomplishments Barbara never had the chance to achieve. After her children graduated from college, married, and settled down, Maria finally felt a sense of relief. Barbara's case grew older and eventually became the oldest unsolved homicide in Gresham. However, that was all about to change. In 2000, vaginal swabs taken during Barbara's autopsy were sent to the Oregon State Police Crime Lab for analysis, with the help of advanced technology. The crime lab developed a DNA profile from the swabs. The detectives never gave up on Barbara's case, and in their pursuit, worked with C.C. Moore, a Virginia-based genetic genealogist who runs a group called DNA Detectives. The DNA sample collected at the crime scene was entered into the GEDmatch database, and a match emerged. Finally, in 2021, a genealogist with Parabon Nanolabs using DNA technology identified Robert Plimpton as a likely contributor to the unknown DNA profile developed in 2000. Detectives with the Gresham Police Department found that Robert was living in Troutdale, Oregon, and had begun conducting surveillance immediately. During their surveillance, the detectives saw Robert spit a piece of chewing gum onto the ground, which they collected and submitted to the OSP Crime Lab. The lab determined the DNA profile developed from the chewing gum matched the DNA profile developed from Barbara's vaginal swabs. On June 8, 2021, Robert Plimpton was arrested as he drove away from his Troutdale home, and he was lodged at the Multnomah County Detention Center. He was charged with murder, rape, and sexual abuse, and was held on a $500,000 bond. This was the first arrest made in the Barbara Tucker case, and at this point, Robert was 41 years old. Lisa Plimpton, Robert's wife, said the arrest was a shock and that her husband denied the accusation of killing Tucker. She mentioned that she and her husband were high school students at Reynolds High School in Troutdale when the news of Barbara's murder spread. According to Lisa, the only way Robert knew of Barbara was through the news. In the decades that followed Barbara's death, Robert had worked up quite the rap sheet. Court records show he had been convicted 3 times for fourth-degree assault, twice for kidnapping, and also multiple convictions for driving under the influence of intoxicants as well as other traffic violations. According to the Oregon Department of Corrections, he was convicted of second-degree kidnapping in Multnomah County in 1985, for which he served a 30-month sentence. He also served 2 6-month sentences for DUI charges and parole violations. Oregon court records also show Robert was arrested in 1997 by Portland police on allegations that were similar to Barbara's case. He was accused of attempted sodomy and assault in an attack on a woman. Court records say investigators had suspected that Robert drove her to a secluded place and attacked her. An officer later came across the woman, who was crying and injured. The case was dismissed after a grand jury found insufficient evidence to file a criminal complaint. Lisa maintained that her husband had turned his life around and had been sober for 25 years. At the time of Robert's arrest, he had been married to Lisa for 18 years, and they also had a son. Barbara's friends and family found it unsettling and disappointing that her attacker was so close by over 4 decades, and no one knew about it. Robert had pleaded not guilty to the charges and claimed to not fit the suspect's description. The trial started on February 26, 2024, and lasted until March 15th. Chief Deputy District Attorney Kristen Snowden and Senior Deputy District Attorney Todd Jackson represented the state, and Robert was defended by Stephen Howes.
Next matter, page 17, line.
Robert Plimpton of Troutdale in court Wednesday to face murder and sex abuse charges. This virtual hearing is long overdue, to say the least.
Robert's defense chose a bench hearing before Multnomah County Circuit Court Judge Amy Baggio over a grand jury, and the trial for the assault and murder of Barbara Tucker began. Attorney Kristen Snowden clarified to the court that there is no evidence to establish a connection between 16-year-old Robert and 19-year-old Barbara.
It sounds like he was a complete stranger.
The defense argued that there was unavoidable, reasonable doubt about who killed Barbara. The eyewitnesses from the scene and the state's witnesses testified that the man they saw drag Barbara back into the bushes was as tall as Barbara, and others claimed he was taller than her. That should make Robert nearly or over 6 feet tall. Robert was, however, only 5 feet 8 inches tall. The defense lawyers also said that the DNA evidence the investigators presented was the chewing gum they picked up off the ground. They did not test Robert's clothing to confirm the results from the OSP crime lab. Judge Baggio delivered her verdict on March 15, 2024, and found Robert guilty of 1 count of murder in the first degree and 4 counts of different theories of murder in the second degree. The judge clarified that the prosecutor failed to prove beyond reasonable doubt that Robert assaulted Barbara while she was still alive, hence the reason he was found not guilty for the assault charge. However, there is no doubt that Robert beat Barbara in her face and head until the 19-year-old died. While his sentence is still pending in the presence of Judge Baggio in this case, he currently remains in custody in Multnomah County. Barbara's siblings expressed their joy and relief when the police first informed them of their first arrest in Barbara's case.
It was surprising, it was overwhelming, and it was good to hear.
2 members of the Tucker family who were present in the verdict hearing wept and embraced after Robert's verdict was announced. Barbara's older sister, Alice Wan, mentioned how she thought the case might never be cracked, but her family was thrilled that the once rigid case was finally solved.
I wish it could have happened when my folks were alive, and that would have been, wonderful.
It took 44 years, and their parents were not here to see it. But Barbara finally got justice. On July 16, 1991, the normally peaceful city of Ventura, California was shaken by a sudden murder. Danielle Lynn Claus, a 42-year-old woman, was discovered dead in a flood control catch basin in the hills near the downtown area. Despite initial investigative efforts, the case went cold, leaving Danielle's family and the community in a state of unresolved grief. It took 33 long years for the authorities to finally uncover the truth behind her murder. Why did it take more than 3 decades to find her killer? This is the haunting story of the long-awaited justice for Danielle Lynn. Danielle Lynn Claus was born on July 24, 1948, in Ventura, California, and raised in a loving family. She was the second of 3 siblings. Her sister Marcy Forte remembers her as a vibrant and caring individual with a heart full of compassion. Danielle attended Ventura High School in her hometown, where she was known for her artistic skills and love for performing arts. She especially enjoyed painting and found comfort in her artwork. After high school, she went to Ventura College and majored in fine arts, hoping to make a career out of her passion. In addition to being a talented artist, Danielle was also a devoted wife and mother. She worked various jobs to support herself and her family. By 1991, she was working as a receptionist at a local law firm. Her co-workers described her as hard-working and always ready to help. Outside of work, Danielle was very involved in community activities and often volunteered at local shelters. motivated by her desire to give back to the community. But little did anyone know that her bright spirit would soon be extinguished. On the night of July 15, 1991, Danielle left her office after a long day at work. She planned to meet a friend for dinner, but never made it to the restaurant. The next morning, her husband grew worried and went around the city looking for her. But there was no trace of Danielle. Unwilling to wait any longer, he reported her disappearance to the Ventura Police Department. The police took immediate action and began the search for Danielle. That very morning, on July 16th, the police made a gruesome discovery. They found Danielle's body in a flood control basin in the hilly area near downtown Ventura. The scene was both horrific and perplexing.
Around 10:30 a.m. on Tuesday, July 16, 1991, the body of Danielle Claus was found on the hillside located at the top of Tioga Drive near downtown Ventura. Danielle was found partially unclothed with multiple blunt force injuries and was last seen the evening of July 15, 1991 at the corner of Hemlock Street and Thompson Boulevard, talking to a male driving a small white pickup with pinstripes.
The condition of her body revealed crucial evidence, signs of a struggle, and defensive wounds on her hands and arms, indicating she had fought her attacker. An autopsy determined that the cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head, inflicted by a heavy object. The murder weapon was later identified as a rock found at the crime scene. The Ventura Police Department immediately launched a thorough investigation, led by Lieutenant Douglas Aldridge. As the police questioned people, a witness came forward with Danielle's last known sighting. On the evening of July 15, 1991, the witness had seen Danielle talking to a man driving a white pickup truck. Police also found traces of wheel marks at the crime scene. But even after extensive investigation, they were unable to locate the vehicle or its owner. Hoping to find more clues, the police sent Danielle's body to the forensic department. Forensic analysis confirmed that Danielle had been assaulted. DNA evidence was collected from the rock used as a murder weapon, but the technology at the time wasn't advanced enough to identify the perpetrator. As a result, the clues remained a puzzle. As the 1990s progressed with no new leads, the case went cold. The investigation stalled, waiting for future technological advancements to bring justice to Danielle Lynn Claus. As the years passed, many unanswered questions kept lingering in the air. Who could have committed such a terrible crime? And perhaps more importantly, with no means to link the DNA evidence, was the real culprit hiding in plain sight all these years? Even as these questions haunted the community, Danielle's sister Marcy Forte never lost faith in the police department. She believed they would do everything in their power, no matter how long it took, to unmask the real killer and bring justice to Danielle.
You know, I miss my sister.
Marcy Fort has been waiting 3 decades for answers about her sister's unsolved murder.
I just didn't have a lot of trust that they were doing everything they could because so many years had gone by.
Marcy's unwavering trust and the tireless efforts of the investigators were key to solving this decades-old mystery. After 33 years of waiting, in 2018, a new development breathed life back into the investigation. Detective Tyler Buck, who was experienced in solving cold cases, took a fresh look at Danielle Lynn's murder.
A few years back, when I was a newer major crimes detective, I developed a pretty significant interest in cold cases, and I was hoping that I'd be able to find something that one of the investigators missed somewhere along the way, something that I could help move the case forward.
Detective Buck carefully looked through all the old evidence, such as the rock used to murder Danielle, as well as her fingernail clippings, both of which had the DNA of the culprit.
I found Danielle's case file, It was over 1,000 pages long, and it was scanned into one long PDF document. I studied the case, I got really familiar with it, and I could see that retired Detective Doug Aldridge and his team at the time did a great job documenting the scene, gathering evidence. We still had a ton of evidence preserved, and we had a great DNA profile of the suspect. Although it had been entered into CODES and had been searching for a match for over 20 years, it simply never hit on any profile in the system. This is very similar to the Golden State Killer case. I connected with our crime scene investigations team, and we combed through the evidence to discover that the murder weapon, which was a rock, as well as the victim's fingernail clippings, were still available and had never been tested.
He checked every part of the case file closely. His commitment to getting justice for Danielle brought back hope for her family and the community. Investigators just had to figure out the identity of the killer with the DNA profile, a task that was now possible with new technology, but also very expensive. In June 2022, they secured a grant to get the necessary funds for an advanced genealogy test with the help of the nonprofit Season of Justice, which provides financial assistance to help solve cold cases.
In May of 2021, our CSI team met with Major Crimes and Ventura County Crime Lab forensic scientist Kristen Kenko to present the untested evidence and request for a test so that the DNA on the rock and the fingernail clippings to be compared to the DNA from the sexual assault kit. This test would either confirm or deny that our murder suspect and the rape suspect were one of the same. So by September 2021, all the DNA came back as a match to one unknown suspect. At that point, we knew we had to use modern investigation methods like familial genealogy to solve this case. However, genealogy testing is quite expensive, and we needed additional funding to continue down this path. At this point, we connected with Season of Justice, a nonprofit dedicated to providing funding for law enforcement. They provide agencies and families to help solve cold cases and bring resolution to those impacted by unsolved violent crimes.
Detective Tyler Buck used a special technique called forensic genetic genealogy with the help of genealogist Gabrielle Weimer. This method looks at DNA to find family connections in genealogy databases. When they analyzed the DNA found at the crime scene, they discovered that it matched the Welch family, who were still alive. The police then contacted Deborah Welch, who they believed was related to the suspect. Deborah willingly provided her DNA sample to help identify her family members. Using this DNA information, the police identified two of Deborah's cousins as potential suspects. Eventually, they found that the DNA from one of these cousins perfectly matched the DNA found at the crime scene. This cousin was a man named Larry Devin Welch, who had passed away in 1999. The detectives suspected that Larry might be the person who had killed Danielle.
Our genealogist built out part of the family tree of our suspect. Through meticulous genealogical analysis, a living family member link had emerged. The family member, who we'll call Deborah, was very interested in familial genealogy and had developed a very detailed family tree herself. At that point, our major crimes detectives, Stephanie Avila and Roger Nunez, went down to San Diego to connect with her. Once meeting her in person, she was very interested in supporting our investigation. She even provided a whole breakdown of her entire family tree, and she even offered a DNA sample. Through her DNA sample analysis, we learned that she was a first cousin match. Now, this is a huge breakthrough for us. In revisiting her family tree, we knew she only had 2 male first cousins, and our search was narrowed even further. We are now focusing on a set of brothers, the Welches. One of the brothers was alive and living in the state of Virginia. The other brother was deceased. At this point, we're kind of at a standstill on how to proceed, as we didn't have the staffing or the resources available to send 2 of our detectives out of state to sit and obtain a surreptitious DNA sample.
To be sure, they looked into Larry's life and history. They found out he had been in Ventura around the time of the murder, and had a violent past. They also found evidence that the white pickup truck belonged to him, linking him to the crime scene. Putting all this together, they concluded that Larry Devin Welch was most likely Danielle's killer. After Larry Devin Welch was identified as the perpetrator, the legal proceedings took an unusual path. Since Welch was already deceased, there would be no trial or sentencing. The case was officially closed, and the findings were documented to provide a comprehensive account of the investigation and its resolution. The Ventura Police Department held a press conference to announce the breakthrough, detailing the steps taken to solve the case and acknowledging the tireless efforts of the investigators and forensic experts involved. At the press conference, the Ventura Chief of Police commended the dedication of the officers and forensic team. He stated that the case showed how their department had never given up on seeking justice for Danielle Lynn Claus. Thanks to advancements in forensic technology, they were able to bring closure to her family and hold her murderer accountable even after Larry's death. The police also acknowledged the role of forensic genetic genealogy in solving the case, highlighting its potential in solving other cold cases.
I always prayed that not so much there'd be justice, but that I'd be able to know who did this. 31 years later, my prayers were answered. They did a phenomenal job, and I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful that I lived to see at least a meter of justice, and that they found out who did this, even though he died 8 years after she was killed. I want to say that my sister was so much more than a victim of a brutal murder. She was more than an artist and a daughter, a sister, a mother, a wife. She was more than all of those things. She was a good person with a mighty soul. And she was taken way, way too young.
With Larry Devin Welch identified as the culprit, the case of Danielle Lynn Claus finds some closure, though it's shadowed by the sadness of lost time and unanswered questions. Even though Welch can't be brought to trial, solving the case shows how important it is to keep seeking justice no matter what. For Danielle's sister, Marcy Forte, the resolution brings a mix of feelings. She's relieved to finally have answers, but she's also sad about all the years of pain and uncertainty. Still, Marcy's determination to honor her sister's memory gives hope to others in tough situations. With the case's resolution, there is a renewed sense of purpose within the Ventura Police Department and the broader law enforcement community. The successful use of forensic genetic genealogy in solving Danielle's murder offers hope for solving other cold cases and delivering justice long overdue. Danielle Lynn Claus's story is coming to an end. The outcome of this case is not just about making things right for her family and the community, but also about showing how important it is to keep fighting for justice, even when it seems impossible. Back in 1991, Danielle's murder shocked everyone in Ventura. But even as the years passed, her sister Marcy never gave up hope. She kept pushing for answers, even when it seemed like the case would never be solved. Her determination inspired others to keep searching for the truth. Now, after all this time, there's finally closure. It's a sad ending, but also a relief to know that justice has been served. Danielle's memory will always be with those who loved her, and her story reminds us all to never stop fighting for what's right, no matter how long it takes.
On the afternoon of Wednesday, 28th of March, 1990, neighbors suddenly heard multiple gunshots ring loud and clear from one of the homes on M Street, in the northeast part of Washington, D.C. By the time the police arrived, there was a growing crowd outside the home, whose front door was ominously open. Norman Rich, a 34-year-old father of three, popularly known as Simo, was found lying face down in his apartment. He had been shot dead in his underwear, and the only witness, Sheila Brown, his girlfriend at the time, gave a chilling statement. With no real leads or suspects, the Metropolitan Police Department offered a $25,000 reward to anyone with information on the homicide, but no one came forward. Detectives tried in vain to piece together the events of that day, but as months passed, the case slowly went cold. Only Norman's family continued hoping for a breakthrough. Finally, something changed in 2024. More than 3 decades after his murder, the police made a surprise arrest that left everyone unsettled. What truly happened that morning of March 28, 1990? Was someone hiding something? Will justice finally be served? As a little boy, Norman Lawrence Rich was given the nickname Simo by his grandmother on account of his intuitive nature and his ability to see more of the world than others. Born in 1955 as the oldest of 7 siblings, Norman matured at an early age and worked hard to provide for his family. He was like a dad to us, Norman's sister, Sakaya Tyler, said in a recent interview. He worked hard to provide for us, and then he had his own family and worked hard to provide for them. He was just that type of person. He'd give the shirt off his back for someone in need. Choosing to remain in Washington, D.C., where he was raised, Norman started a family with Sheila Brown, his long-term girlfriend. Norman held many different jobs over the years, but by 1990 he was a stay-at-home dad devoted to his 3 young kids while Sheila worked. Unfortunately, no one ever suspected the devastating fate that awaited this young family. According to Sheila, on the morning of March 28, 1990, 2 men came looking for Norman around 8 a.m. Sheila recognized one of the men as Ducky, Norman's friend, so she let him into their home. The only odd thing she noticed was that the other man had a brown paper bag under his arm, but she didn't overthink it then. Leaving the kids in Norman's care, she went to run errands and visit the hair salon. By the time she got back around 1 p.m., their front door was open, and a gruesome sight awaited her inside. Norman was lying face down in the bedroom, covered in blood with multiple gunshot wounds. He was still dressed in the white t-shirt and boxer shorts that Sheila had seen him put on before she left. Police quickly arrived at the scene following a 911 report of gunshots being fired in the neighborhood. The couple's kids who were in another room during the shooting were too traumatized to offer any help. Sheila took them to a neighbor's house while the police taped the crime scene. The only thing certain was that they were dealing with a homicide. Norman had been shot 4 times, and the room looked like it had been searched. Detective Ruben Sanchez interviewed Sheila, who stated she saw a suspicious-looking person walking away from the direction of their home when she returned from her outing. She agreed to help create composite drawings of the men who had visited Norman before she left. However, the detective sensed that Sheila was being evasive and reluctant when explaining what had happened. A neighbor also reported seeing a suspicious person lurking around the Rich's home on the day of the murder, and he described the unknown figure as a tall, thin man with a mustache, wearing a black leather jacket and hat. Several suspects were detained based on these descriptions, but no arrest was made due to insufficient evidence. Norman's family was deeply affected by his sudden death. His sister Sakaya, who was 26 at the time, learned about the shooting from a colleague at her workplace. She immediately rushed to her brother's home, where the rest of her family had already arrived, reeling from the shock and grief. Norman's mother, Helen Rich Fraser, broke down completely at the news. In the months that followed, she continued to grieve the death of her first child, even as she battled against cancer of the larynx. Just a year later, Helen passed away, without getting justice for her boy. But on her deathbed, she made her remaining children promise to stay on the case till the end. Determined to keep her promise, Sakaya took to the streets to perform her own investigation and never stopped, even as decades passed. She filled hundreds of journals with her notes on the case. She also created a Facebook page called Justice for Simo, where she posted pictures of his early life as well as pleas for anyone with information to contact the family or the police. Shortly after Norman's death, his 3 children, all under the age of 11, were taken into protective custody by social services, where their mother Sheila was being interviewed. Their formative years were marred by the struggle to move on from the brutal death of their father. Even though they grew up and went on to have kids of their own, they never stopped wondering how their life might have been different if their father had still been alive. He would have been 60 years old now, Sakaya said in an interview in 2015, showing an age enhancement picture of Norman if he were still alive. To outsiders, Norman's side of town might have seemed peaceful, with his death being a one-off event, but in reality the world around him was chaotic. The northeast part of Washington, D.C. was plagued by crime and killings in those days, so much so that the town had a nightly television program called City Under Siege, with Norman's case being the 124th murder in the area over the past 5 years. The Metropolitan Police Department was quite overworked and understaffed. Still, Detective Sanchez set his sights on the case. He drilled the potential suspects, especially Norman's girlfriend Sheila Brown, but was unable to make an arrest due to the lack of evidence. In 1990, DNA technology wasn't advanced enough, and there were no other witnesses to explain what had happened. All they had was Sheila's statement, the composite drawings based on her descriptions, and Norman's body. Desperate for answers, the police provided a $25,000 reward to anyone with information on the case, but no one turned up, not even an anonymous tip. This was suspicious, as $25,000 was a lot of money for people to just pass up. Detective Sanchez sensed that the answer to the homicide lay within the family, that maybe Sheila wasn't a reliable witness, but without evidence his hands were tied. As years went by, the police considered other possibilities. Maybe Norman was robbed for money and got shot along the line, or maybe he was involved in some gambling business. Unfortunately, none of these theories led to any breakthroughs. In 2001, 11 years after Norman's death, Sheila Brown withdrew her earlier statement about 2 men coming to visit him that fateful day. This meant there was nothing else to work with, so the investigation stalled and the case grew cold. In January 2021, Detective Michael Fulton took over the still open case, but just like the previous detectives, he struggled to make headway. He urged people with any information to come forward, but stayed tight-lipped about the case's progress. Norman's case slowly became one of the oldest unsolved crimes in Washington, D.C. However, this was about to change soon. Exactly 34 years to the exact date of Norman's murder, the police made an unexpected move. Detective Michael Fulton had pieced together the events of that unfortunate day and made a shocking discovery that would change everything. On March 28, 2024, Sheila Brown, Norman's girlfriend at the time of his death, was arrested from her home in Annapolis, Maryland. The 66-year-old was charged with second-degree murder and obstruction of justice in the case of Norman Simo Rich, but she pleaded not guilty and was later placed on bail. Her court hearing was scheduled for June 2024. According to D.C. Police Inspector Kevin Kentish, investigators had used new technology and DNA tests to reanalyze all the evidence and witness statements, uncovering certain clues that led to Sheila's arrest. However, the police stayed quiet about the details, offering no explanations of why the arrest was made. Still, it was the first official arrest made since the ugly incident in March 1990, so it gained a lot of traction. Sakaya, who was given the news of the arrest by Detective Fulton, expressed her joy at being one step closer to getting justice. She also revealed that she had never believed in Sheila's innocence, but had no case to cling on to. With Sheila's arrest, Sakaya hoped she would find closure at last, as the mystery of what happened to Norman that day would finally be solved. People need to hear his story, she said. We've tried for years to get people to listen. It's time for everyone to hear the truth about what happened to him. With this development, one could only hope that justice will finally be served. Following Sheila Brown's arrest by the Annapolis Police Department and the United States Marshal Service, the authorities have issued a press release statement about the jury's latest discovery. However, there has been no definite statement on what will happen next. One can't help but wonder about the reason for Sheila's alleged crime. Could their living arrangement have been a grievance for her? Was she resentful at having to work while Norman stayed home? The next court hearing is scheduled for June 2024, and we hope to get more answers then. Still, the lines for sharing any information about Norman's death are still available. People are requested to call the Metropolitan Police Department's Synchronized Operations Command Center, SOCC, at 202-727-9099 or email unsolved.murder@dc.gov.
On February 27, 2024, a breakthrough was made in a 20-year-old cold case in the quiet coastal city of Ormond Beach, Florida. The discovery of a buried body beneath a house on the 1300 block of Hand Avenue by officials startled the neighborhood. Although the identity was initially unclear, forensic analysis quickly revealed that the person may be a girl who went missing on May 10, 2004. What specific circumstances do you think brought the cops to this disturbing discovery? And more importantly, who was the person they uncovered? After DNA confirmation from her family, it was clear that the remains belonged to Autumn Lane McClure, born in Ormond Beach, Florida, on April 12, 1987. Autumn Lane McClure was an intelligent and outgoing teenager who went to Mainland High School. She was passionately involved in a variety of school events and always supported her classmates during these occasions. But even with her lively personality, there were still many unanswered questions regarding her personal history and her family life. Autumn began working part-time at the famous grocery store Winn-Dixie in Jacksonville, Florida, when she was 16 years old. She was living with her grandmother at the time, who gave her a home that seemed stable. Life did not, however, come without difficulties. Autumn decided to leave one day following a fight with her grandma, the details of which are still unknown. Feeling uneasy and in need of comfort, she went to her Winn-Dixie co-workers. At the beginning, she had no luck getting the help she needed, but soon, 2 Winn-Dixie co-workers had stepped forward. Autumn was then offered a place to stay by Jessica Freeman and Brian Donnelly, a couple who lived in the Shady O's mobile home park in Ormond Beach. Seeing this as a win-win situation, Autumn moved in with them, full of hope for a fresh start. However, what at the time appeared to be a kind offer would thereafter become the center of a number of unsettling inquiries regarding her disappearance. Autumn maintained contact with her grandma, who called her every day to see how she was doing even after she made the decision to move out. However, Autumn failed to answer the phone on May 9, 2004. Her grandma chose not to call her again that day, assuming she had been busy with work. May 10th was the next day, and Autumn did not pick up when calls were made. Her grandmother became worried and called the police to report her missing. Autumn disappeared, and the authorities looked into the case right away. The couple she was staying with, Jessica Freeman and Brian Donnelly, were the first people they questioned. The pair stated that they had not seen Autumn since May 9th, and that they were unsure of her whereabouts. Her grandmother was next contacted by the police, but sadly, she was also unable to provide any helpful information. The police then spoke with friends and acquaintances of Autumn, which helped them track down her lover, Michael Celli. He said that he had last seen Autumn on May 10th, when he had taken her to Volusia Mall in Florida's Daytona Beach. After interviewing workers and customers at the mall, detectives were unable to find any information regarding Autumn's whereabouts. Even after a week of searching, the authorities were still unable to find any reliable clues. Later, strange letters stamped from Melbourne, Florida, allegedly from Autumn, were received by Autumn's grandma. Autumn hinted to plans in those letters to move back home after she turned 18. Recognizing the possible significance of this data, the authorities attempted to track out Autumn's location and discover the source of the letters. They worked hard, but they were unable to establish for sure if Autumn really wrote the letters or if someone made them up to deceive the investigation. Autumn Lane McClure's disappearance was the subject of a relentless inquiry. Days became weeks and weeks became months, but no noteworthy discoveries appeared. As the years went by in agonizing silence, hope among her family and friends was destroyed, and the case finally became cold. Detectives persisted in their work in spite of this, refusing to give up on the silence. Crucially, they obtained DNA samples from Autumn's family members and entered her information into the National Missing Children's Database, clinging to the remote possibility that eventually some information may surface. In 2016, 12 years after Autumn disappeared, a startling admission sparked the inquiry. Autumn's boyfriend acknowledged that he had lied when he had said he had dropped her off at Volusia Mall the day before she vanished. Rather, he disclosed that the last time he had seen her was on May 10, 2004 at Seabreeze Bridge, where she got into a car with an unknown woman. There was no indication of why he had lied at first, but there was suspicion that he may have in order to remove himself from suspicion or any connection to her disappearance. The investigation picked up steam as a result of this fresh lead. Officials analyzed CCTV footage from the immediate area of the bridge and conducted in-depth interviews with individuals. Sadly, Autumn's boyfriend's strange woman was nowhere to be located. It was really difficult for the cops to make any significant progress because there was a lack of fresh evidence, and the case was so complex. The case ended in frustration and confidentiality, even though they tried their hardest. The puzzle pieces remained elusive, and those looking for answers were never able to pull the truth about what had happened to Autumn Lane McClure. In 2018, police decided to get back in touch with Jessica, who had moved to Nevada because the case was still confusing law enforcement and the community. She first insisted that she was unaware of Autumn McClure's whereabouts. However, when Chris Miller, a relative of Brian and Jessica, stepped forward in 2022, the case took a drastically different path. He made public a shocking admission made by Brian, who was said to have confessed to killing Autumn and concealing her body in Volusia County. When Autumn vanished, Brian was living with Autumn, Jessica, and his girlfriend. When Autumn had nowhere to stay after leaving her family, they both decided to take her into their home because they worked at the same business. Chris's discovery was made after Brian had already died on May 26, 2022, during a medical procedure, making it too late to hold him responsible. Although the news dealt a severe damage to the investigation, it also created new lines of inquiry. Not long after it was discovered that Brian had died, Jessica contacted the sheriff's office and asked to be spared from prosecution in return for her assistance. Jessica requested immunity, which was unexpected given that she wasn't the main suspect. Nevertheless, the police accepted her request, and Jessica started disclosing important information. In late 2023, during the interrogation, Jessica disclosed unsettling information regarding Autumn and Brian's sexual relationship. She said that on the day of Autumn's disappearance, she had been the one to pick her up from the Seabreeze Bridge and dump her off at her house. She also admitted to seeing Autumn and Brian in the bathroom during a heated exchange while he choked her. Brian had threatened her when she'd challenged him, saying there would be terrible things that would happen if she told anyone about what happened. Most importantly, Jessica gave the precise Ormond Beach neighborhood where Autumn's remains were buried. She told of how, with grim relief, Brian would go to the burial site, which was eventually covered by a house, to make sure his acts were a secret. Even though it was many years after Autumn vanished, this discovery gave her family and the community some closure, and answered some of the nagging questions. The revelation also led to a reconsideration of the available data, and a renewed desire to guarantee Autumn's justice, even in her death. The discovery of Autumn McClure's body represented a serious turning point in a lengthy mystery that had baffled the residents of Ormond Beach. Sheriff Chitwood expressed a mixture of pride and sadness as he considered the year's worth of work done by the investigation team. He also expressed his sympathies to Autumn's family in his remarks, recognizing the harsh fact that while the case had made great strides, the primary suspect, Brian Donnelly, had escaped conviction by passing away in 2022. More information about Autumn's cause of death surfaced. Since Autumn was only 16 at the time and Brian was 31, Jessica, who had given essential information that helped lead to the discovery of Autumn's body, suggested that Brian had acted out of fear that Autumn would reveal their inappropriate relationship to her family, which could have resulted in serious legal consequences for him. Subsequently, authorities determined that Jessica was not directly responsible for Autumn's death. Leading the inquiry that eventually resulted in the finding of Autumn's remains was Detective McGuire, who had authored one of the first reports on the case back in 2004. In response to a query from a journalist, Sheriff Chitwood verified that Jessica Freeman and Brian Donnelly were living together and in a relationship. He also recognized how complicated their interactions with Autumn were. The same journalist then inquired about the nature of Autumn's relationship with the couple. Sheriff Chitwood responded positively, highlighting the challenging circumstances surrounding Autumn's life and disappearance by mentioning the sexual relationship. When asked how the family was responding to the news, Detective McGuire revealed that although the family was happy to finally have some answers, he said they weren't shocked because there had been long-running whispers about upsetting events surrounding her last days. The fact that Autumn had finally been located and could be buried with respect after all these years had brought the family great relief. A gruesome discovery unfolded on Highway 78 near Olive Branch, Mississippi. A truck driver making his southbound journey on the morning of January 24, 1985, spotted a body just east of the Coldwater River Bridge around 7:30 a.m. The lifeless figure, identified as a woman, lay 20 feet off the highway, stripped of her shoes, undergarments, and jacket. The only articles of clothing remaining were a light peach short-sleeved pullover with an embroidered design and blue Gloria Vanderbilt jeans. An autopsy revealed she'd likely been deceased for a few days. But despite some decomposition, her features were still recognizable. The unanswered questions remained. What caused this woman's tragic death by the side of the road? And who was she? After much investigation, detectives concluded that she had been strangled, most likely with a ligature. At 5 feet 3 inches tall, the woman weighed about 110 pounds. She was most likely between the ages of 20 and 35. Her medium-length wavy hair was colored pale red to blonde. Each ear had 3 piercings on her, along with a little surgical scar on her left forearm. They also discovered tattoos on the inside of both of her ankles. Still, it was difficult to recognize her in spite of all of this knowledge. Sadly, she had to be handled like a Jane Doe, because there was no identification documents on her or in the area around her body. Under the moniker Jane Doe, her remains were laid to rest at the Olive Branch's Blocker Cemetery. The National Missing and Unidentified Persons System now has the case details under UP 8675. Additionally, the case was quickly turned into a homicide because it was determined that the victim had been strangled, although the cause of death was still unknown. They lacked many of the advanced techniques available to us in the 1980s. Test after test was conducted and every potential clue was pursued, but to no avail. The police were forced to file the case away with the other unsolved cases eventually. But in 2022, the Mississippi Office of the State Medical Examiner and the DeSoto County Sheriff's Office made the decision to give it another go. In the hopes that cutting-edge DNA testing would ultimately assist in identifying the deceased woman, they forwarded forensic evidence recovered from her remains to Othram in the Woodlands, Texas. They had tried unsuccessfully before, but this time they were hoping to find at least one clue to pursue. Carla Davis, a philanthropist from Mississippi who was committed to cracking the case of unsolved cold cases in her own state, provided funding for this project. Thankfully, Othram's experts worked their magic and used forensic-grade genome sequencing to create a DNA profile. Othram's own forensic genetic genealogy team set to work with this profile. They dug deeply into the information at hand, following links and family trees. In the end, they discovered a few fresh clues that police might want to investigate. Based on similarity in their DNA profiles, the woman's ancestors looked to exist. Following the initial discovery, detectives located the slain woman's relatives. They then identified the dead woman as Lorie Ann Mealer Pennell, a Missouri native born on September 6, 1962, by comparing her DNA profile to that of a close relative who wished to stay nameless. When she passed away, she was 22 years old. An announcement made on March 1, 2024 stated that Pennell was seen at a truck stop in West Memphis, Arkansas, a few days prior to her abduction. She was never located despite her family filing a missing persons report in West Memphis, Arkansas. At last, the family discovered what had happened to her, and Jane Doe's true identity was made public. She passed away, but the cause of death is still being looked into, and no new information has been released as of yet. The terrible story of Lorie Ann Mealer Pennell, unidentified for almost 40 years, acts as a reminder of the lasting effects of unsolved murders. Her identity was finally revealed, bringing some closure to her family. However, the circumstances of her death remain unclear, and the investigation continues. In February 1991, Brenda Condon, 28 years old, began working part-time as a bartender at Carlsbad Tavern in Spring Township, Pennsylvania. She had only been on the job for 2 weeks when an unusual incident occurred. On February 26, 1991, Brenda was working a double shift and was supposed to finish at 6 p.m. However, at that time, her coworkers noticed that she was missing. Her car, a gray 1986 Mercury Capri, was still in the parking lot, and her cowboy boots were found in the men's restroom. Despite these clues, Brenda herself was nowhere to be found. On March 2, 1991, it had become official. Brenda Condon had gone missing. The police endlessly tried to locate 3 suspects who were present in the bar that night. Days turned into weeks, then months, and eventually years passed without any news about Brenda's whereabouts or safety. After 32 years of uncertainty, Brenda's family still continued to wonder about her fate. However, in April of 2024, a promising new lead was discovered, raising hopes that they might finally learn what happened to her. What happened to Brenda? Did Brenda's case finally get solved after 3 decades? Brenda Condon was born on March 1, 1962. She was born and raised in Clearfield County, Pennsylvania, and graduated from Clearfield Area High School in 1980 as Brenda Kuhn. Brenda, with her white complexion and reddish-brown hair, was dearly loved and admired by everyone who knew her. Her family, friends, and co-workers described her as kind, friendly, and dependable. Brenda had 2 children with her ex-husband, Thomas L. Jr. Condon. They used to live in Clearfield, where they raised their children, Shauna and Todd.
She enjoyed the married life.
Oh, okay.
And then after Todd, then 2 years later, she had Shauna.
Okay, so she got married at 16. She was pregnant with her and Thomas's child at 16.
Right.
And then 2 years later, I guess at 18, she had her daughter.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Brenda's older sister, Iris Myers, explained that Brenda and Thomas grew apart during their marriage. Their divorce was friendly, and they agreed that Shauna and Todd would stay with their father so they could remain in the same school and be close to their friends and family. Brenda had the freedom to meet her children whenever she wanted, to spend time with them. Todd mentioned that his parents regularly spoke on the phone about various things, and their relationship was positive and healthy. After the divorce, Brenda had moved to Williamsport, Pennsylvania, where she started her own cleaning service. The informal arrangement between Brenda and Thomas regarding their children continued without any problems. Brenda moved on with her love life when she started dating Greg Palazzari, and their relationship lasted for 2 years. Brenda wanted to be near her children, who still lived in Clearview with her ex-husband Thomas. She decided to move in with her boyfriend Greg at Harvest Circle State College. This was a few months before she disappeared. Brenda relocated to State College and started a second branch of her home cleaning business there. In February of 1991, she got a second job as a part-time bartender at Carlsbad Tavern, located at 1796 Zion Road in Spring Township. By February 26, 1991, Brenda had been working at the bar for 2 weeks. Her responsibility was to close the bar after the last customers left, clean up, and then start her day shift at 10 a.m. the following day. The next morning, when the day crew arrived for work, Brenda's absence was not noticed. The morning shift carried on as normal. Nothing seemed amiss. The bar was clean. The receipts had been put away from the previous night, and the lights were turned off. There were no signs of a break-in or robbery. The day shift ended at 6 p.m., and her coworkers finally noticed that they had not seen her all day. Her car was in the parking lot, and her shoes were neatly placed in the men's bathroom, but her car keys and purse were not found. On February 27th, her coworker saw Brenda for the last time, talking with an unknown man around 12:45 p.m. to 1:15 a.m. inside the bar. She was spending time with the guy for a whole night, but nobody knew this new identity. Brenda was reported missing that evening, with the police notified 17 hours after she was last seen. Despite this, no immediate investigation was launched into her disappearance. Brenda was supposed to pick up her 2 children in Clearview on March 2, 1991. Brenda was devoted to them and unlikely to miss visitation. There was speculation she might have taken a trip to clear her mind, though it was out of character. They had anticipated that Brenda might come home safe on March 2nd, but it wasn't the outcome. She still disappeared. When Brenda's loved ones heard the news, they couldn't believe it. Brenda's 29th birthday was in 2 days, and she had made plans before her disappearance. She and her boyfriend Greg were supposed to have a fancy birthday dinner on March 1st, 1991, and on the following day. They were supposed to visit her new home and have a late birthday celebration. Even if Brenda had taken some time off, she would never have missed picking up her children. On March 2nd, 12-year-old Todd and 10-year-old Shauna waited outside their father's house with their bags packed, hoping to see their mother arrive in her 1986 Mercury Capri. As hours passed and Brenda didn't show up, Todd began to worry that something might be wrong. He explained the situation to the police, and that's when an official investigation into Brenda's disappearance began. An extensive search of the area was conducted for Brenda with the help of trained dogs, rescue groups, and helicopters, searching every square inch of the area around Carlsbad Tavern, but found nothing. Local and state police claimed to have conducted numerous interviews, but received no solid results. There were no signs of a struggle, break-in, or robbery inside the bar. Brenda had cleaned up and put away the receipts at the end of the night, which indicated that she was probably ready to go home. When the day shift crew arrived, they found the bar unlocked. The cigarette vendor who came to service the machine noted that he hadn't seen anyone inside the bar. So investigators had speculated that whatever had happened would have been in the bar as she prepared to leave. They were able to get the description of 3 male patrons of the bar that night. But the involvement of these men in Brenda's disappearance still remains a question. No one has been able to identify them since 1991. The police initially focused on Brenda's ex-husband, Thomas Condon, as a suspect. However, he had a solid alibi, helping his sister Pamela Condon with her new apartment around the time Brenda went missing. Thomas also took a polygraph test, which proved the truth of his alibi. The police also investigated Greg Palazzari's presence at the time of Brenda's disappearance, but got no solid information. The police released every known information about Brenda's disappearance, including the sketches of the 3 men at the bar, to the public. The first man was described as 38 to 40 years old, 6 feet 2 inches, wearing a bright blue down jacket and jeans. The second was 25 to 30 years old and 5 feet 8 inches, wearing a black leather coat, a white button-down shirt, and jeans. The third patron was approximately 50 years old and 5 feet 8 inches, wearing a short dark-colored jacket, dark-colored slacks, and a brown plaid shirt. A $5,000 reward was also promised to anyone with useful information. Brenda was suspected to have been a homicide victim, but without a body, the police could only pursue it as a missing persons case until new evidence surfaced. The initial investigation in 1991 was conducted by the Spring Township Police Department. In the year 2008, this case was transferred to the state police at the request of Spring Township Trooper Brian Wakefield. In an unexpected twist, Greg Palazzari was arrested and convicted in 2014 for running a significant cocaine operation from the Sunoco gas station he owned. He was sentenced to 5 to 10 years in prison, but passed away on April 21, 2016 before completing his sentence. Nancy Jones, who dated Greg after Brenda's disappearance, expressed her belief that Greg may have been involved in Brenda going missing. She didn't think he had murdered Brenda, but Nancy suspected Greg's drug dealing might have put Brenda in danger. This theory was never proven, and authorities instead believed Brenda's murder might be linked to her workplace. Interestingly, it was revealed that shortly after Brenda's disappearance, Carlsbad Tavern had closed down. The police speculated that Brenda's attacker strategically placed her boots in the men's bathroom. Brenda's son, however, thinks otherwise. He remembered that his mother owned many boots, which she loved, but she never cleaned while wearing them. Brenda usually preferred to switch to sneakers, finding them more comfortable. If Brenda had been cleaning, she likely took off her boots herself. Her family continued to stay positive that they could get any news from the police department. On the 10th anniversary of Brenda's disappearance in 2001, police held a press conference with the family about the case, confessed about their lack of leads, the unidentified patrons at the bar, and the choice to put her case on a national database system for missing people. Along the way, Shauna had a daughter of her own now. She was heartbroken that her mother had not gotten the chance to be there for her granddaughter. Brenda's sister Iris had said that Shauna's daughter looked so much like her missing grandmother. 2020 marked the years Brenda had been missing longer than she had been seen alive, and it was hard for everyone. In April of 2024, this case gained renewed attention. Detective Kenneth Maines, a renowned investigator celebrated for solving cold cases in central Pennsylvania and hosting the popular Unsolved No More podcast, took on the challenge of unraveling the mystery. After 33 years since Brenda's puzzling disappearance, he believes he has cracked the case. In a 26-episode YouTube series, he explained the circumstances regarding what might have happened. According to Maines, this perpetrator was Brenda's co-worker, who was known to be a hot-headed womanizer. Members of Carlsbad Tavern crew also affirmed that this coworker was incredibly obsessed with Brenda's case. Although Brenda had cleaned up, there was a single bottle of beer and some money left on the bar. Maines believed Brenda was done for the night, and this coworker was waiting for her to close. He also added that this man had been trying to flirt with Brenda, so he took her boots to the men's bathroom and waited for her there.
The offender is sitting there at the end of the bar. He's finishing his beer. He's waiting for Brenda, who is very flirtatious. We learned that from victimology. That's very important. Okay? And plus, she's a barmaid. So, 2 and 2. I mean, she's very flirtatious.
Maines has handed over his findings to Brenda's family for them to present to state police investigators. He also offered a $10,000 reward in addition to the $5,000 reward the Pennsylvania State Police was offering to anyone with credible information concerning Brenda's case.
I think the state police are offering a $5,000 reward. Well, I'll match that. So we'll say $10,000 for information in regards to the Brenda Condon case.
He said that he hopes the offender comes forward, giving Brenda's family closure, resolution, and peace, which they desire and deserve.
33 years. That doesn't matter, because there's no expiration date on justice.
Although Maines believed Brenda Condon's case is now solved, officially it still remains a cold case. However, the police claim to have a few new leads that cannot be disclosed to the public as of yet. Anyone with information about Condon's disappearance is urged to contact PA Crime Stoppers by calling 1-800-4PA-TIPS or 1-800-472-8477 or by visiting the online tip line. Tips may also be provided to Pennsylvania State Police Rockview Station, which is handling the investigation. You can call 814-355-7545. The tragic yet compelling case of Judith Judy Weaver shows how even the toughest of cold cases can be cracked with developments in forensic technology. 42-year-old Judy, who ran a local cafe in Everett, Washington, and was much loved in the local community, was horrifically assaulted and killed in her home on June 2, 1984, leaving friends and family reeling in shock. Her case remained unresolved for over 40 agonizing years, but in 2024, fresh DNA evidence finally led to her killer's arrest, bringing much-needed peace of mind to Judy's loved ones who had waited decades for answers. As we dig into this case, a few questions arise. In what ways did the development of forensic science aid in solving the cold case murder of Judith Judy Weaver? What difficulties did Judy's family and law enforcement encounter throughout the prolonged investigation? Let's look into the details of this cold case. Judy Weaver grew up in Everett, Washington, where she was born in 1942. Her popularity and charisma in the neighborhood were demonstrated when she was crowned the queen of a local beauty competition at the age of 17. Judy went on to have 2 daughters, Colleen and Kathy, and worked with her mother Edith Pernault at the Bellness Cafe on Hewitt Avenue, where she was also a co-owner. Those who knew Judy described her as friendly, resourceful, and popular. She was loved and appreciated by her close-knit family, as a devoted mother, grandmother, sister, and daughter. Unfortunately, no one could have guessed the horrific fate that awaited Judy in her own home. For Judy, the evening of June 1st, 1984 appeared to be like any other. After closing her cafe, she walked home alone, like she had done every night for years. She even stopped briefly for a late-night snack at the neighborhood Dairy Queen, where she was a regular customer. After that, she proceeded to her one-story apartment on 35th Street and Rucker Avenue, where she lived by herself. But shortly after she got back home, Judy's life was cruelly ended by an unknown intruder who violently assaulted her. Judy was bound, gagged, strangled, and left to die with no mercy. Even her clothes were cut off, denying her dignity in her very last moments. And then, to cover his tracks, the intruder committed one final act of further desecration, culminating in a crime that would leave the community shattered. For Judy's neighbors in Everett, Washington, the morning of June 2, 1984, began with alarm and chaos. Around 6 in the morning, an emergency call was placed to the Everett Fire Department, alerting them to a fire on Rucker Avenue. When the firefighting crew arrived on the site, plumes of black smoke were spewing out of a window. Judy Weaver's apartment was on fire. Firefighters had to break through the closed bedroom door in order to reach the fire's source. Inside, they found a terrifying scene. Even though the fire was limited to the bedroom, the whole place was full of smoke, and concealed in the black haze was Judy's dead body, lying on the floor. It became clear to the emergency personnel that the fire had been intentionally started to cover up a more heinous crime and obliterate any proof. Because of the firefighters' quick action, the fire was contained to the bedroom, sparing more damage to the flat and averting the total destruction of important evidence. Once the fire was under control, officials from the Everett Police Department were immediately called to the scene. As soon as law enforcement officials arrived, the focus of the investigation shifted from a fire to a homicide. Judy was discovered bound and strangled with a phone wire, with multiple visible bruises and injuries. Her clothing had been sliced off, presumably with a knife. Certain that the apartment had been intentionally set on fire, investigators and fire experts carefully examined the crime scene. They discovered that a paper towel contained in a Pod's cold cream container had been used to start the fire on her bed. Securing the crime scene and gathering evidence was the Everett Police Department's initial course of action. Investigators took great care to record every detail of the flat. The rear door of Judy's apartment was found to be open, indicating that the killer might have entered the house through it. Investigators also collected physical proof, such as the phone wire that was used to restrain Judy, and additional objects from the scene that could provide forensic clues. Judy's daughter, Kathy Myers, who lived in Everett, was informed of the heartbreaking news by police officers who showed up at her house. Her other daughter, Colleen Caspi, was living in Alaska at the time and had to drive 6 miles to the nearest phone after a state trooper managed to reach her. The horrific circumstances of the crime added to the shock of hearing about their mother's painful death. The news swiftly rippled across the close-knit neighborhood of Everett, shocking and frightening friends and neighbors. Many people found it difficult to accept that their ostensibly safe area could see such acts of brutality. Local media quickly broke the story of Judy Weaver's murder, which brought a great deal of attention to the case. The neighborhood was gripped by dread and confusion due to the severity of the crime and the attack's seeming randomness. Everett's residents were faced with the disturbing truth that a violent killer was at large. Police interviewed neighbors, hoping to find someone who might have heard or seen something strange on the night of the murder. They pursued many leads and spoke with witnesses, but none of the clues led them anywhere. They searched for a suspect, but were unable to identify one. The attack appeared to be completely random, adding to the case's savagery. Even with these efforts and a lengthy inquiry, the initial investigation proved fruitless. Judy's murder rapidly rose to the top of Everett's unsolved murder pile. Judy's family was outspoken in their pursuit of justice, especially her daughters Colleen and Kathy, who hoped for years that their mother's killer would be apprehended and prosecuted. They spoke with the media on a regular basis, keeping their mother's tale alive in collective memory, and encouraging anyone with knowledge of the crime to come forward. Judy's case was never forgotten, even as the years passed, thanks in part to their tenacity. In spite of these attempts, there were no fresh leads or developments, and the case became cold. Judy's murder signaled the start of a protracted and difficult journey for her family and community. The murder of Judy Weaver remained unsolved for decades, even as her family suffered from the lack of closure. The Everett Police Department kept checking on the case on a regular basis, but there was little they could do in the absence of fresh evidence. Judy's murder turned into one of many unsolved cases that haunted the neighborhood, serving as a constant reminder of the predator lurking unseen in the dark. In 2023, nearly 40 years after Judy was killed, a significant development occurred when Detective Susan Loguercio made the decision to turn over the old crime scene material to the Washington State Patrol Crime Lab. Genetic samples could now be extracted from previously useless materials because of developments in DNA technology. Lab scientists Lisa Collins and Mary Knowlton were able to obtain a DNA profile from Judy's wristband, which was made of cloth. This profile was added to CODES, or the Combined DNA Index System, a nationwide database that houses DNA profiles from crime scenes and convicted offenders. And here, at last, they found Judy's killer. Who really was this man that feared no one, even as he committed a spree of horrific crimes? Judith Weaver had never suspected the danger that was waiting to strike as this ruthless predator waited for his chance. The DNA evidence from Judy's wristband pointed to a level 3 sex offender with a history of severe charges and convictions, 66-year-old Mitchell Gaff. Gaff's criminal history included convictions for attacking a woman in 1979 and assaulting 2 adolescent girls in Everett in 1984, the same year that Judy was killed. Gaff, who was 26 years old then, had been residing at his parents' Everett home at the time. In 1985, he was found guilty on 2 counts of first-degree burglary and rape, for which he received prison sentences. Prosecutors filed a motion to have Gaff detained in custody legally under the state sexual predator statute, just prior to his planned release in 1994. According to court documents, Gaff admitted to conducting multiple more assaults after his conviction. He admitted to trying to assault 10 to 30 women a day, sometimes knocking them down and reaching under their skirts. During a court-ordered psychological assessment, Gaff acknowledged that he preferred forcing victims into undressing with a knife. His actions grew more aggressive in the summer of 1984, when he admitted to stalking women in neighborhood malls and following them to their cars. Gaff himself stated nonchalantly that his obsession with smartly dressed women had made him dangerous that summer. And Judy Weaver had unwittingly attracted his predatory gaze when she walked home alone and carefree that June evening of 1984. Michael Gaff, age 66, was taken into custody in Olympia, Washington on May 1, 2024.
Mitchell Gaff made his first appearance in Snohomish County Court in the decades-old rape and murder of Judy Weaver.
Mr. Gaff is being held on an aggravated first-degree murder charge.
He faced multiple first-degree charges for murder, rape, arson, abduction, and burglary, with prosecutors asking the judge to deny any possibility of bail. Judy's family and the community of Everett were relieved at the news of Gaff's arrest, bringing them one step closer to securing justice for Judy. Gaff was obviously a deranged person who deserved to be held accountable for his acts, as evidenced by his violent and sadistic history of offenses. Judy Weaver's family can finally find some closure with Mitchell Gaff's arrest. Though nothing can bring Judy back, her loved ones can start the healing process, knowing that her killer has been found and will face punishment. In the wake of Gaff's arrest, Police Chief John DeRouse and Mayor Cassie Franklin of Everett praised the detective's work and commitment in solving the decades-old case. They also acknowledged the strength and perseverance of Judy's family in keeping hope for justice alive. The tragic tale of Judy Weaver serves as a heartbreaking reminder of the toll that violent crimes take on communities and families. It emphasizes how vital it is to never give up, and how important technological improvements might be in cracking cold cases. Judy's family and the community, who still remember her as a cherished mother, grandmother, sister, and friend, carry on her legacy. As Judith Weaver's cold case finds some justice after 4 decades, we reflect on the emotions that this revelation stirs. This case illustrates the challenges associated with solving historical crimes and the value of utilizing path-breaking new technologies to bring justice and closure for the relatives and friends of the victims. Let us now hear your thoughts on this situation. How much do you believe that forensic technological developments have contributed to the resolution of long-running cold cases such as this one? On August 10, 1996, 2 young girls, Pamela and Michelle Ames, aged 9 and 5, were playing peacefully at their home in Jacksonville, Florida. The young girls were under the care of their loving 31-year-old mother. That day, their laughter turned into hurried breaths and panic when they couldn't find their mother. They waited anxiously, but the silence persisted, unsettling them deeply. Their mother, always attentive and never one to leave them alone for long, was nowhere to be found. When the sisters finally received news about their mother, it changed their lives forever. Their mother, Valerie Ames, was found several hours later. She had been beaten, stabbed, and dead in a vacant apartment far away from her home. However, the apartment didn't belong to any of her friends or family. In fact, the homeowner wasn't even present in the house when she was murdered. How did Valerie end up in an unoccupied apartment? What had happened inside that empty house that ended with her losing her life? Valerie Ames was known for her positive behavior and her fondness for animals and her kids. Valerie was a gentle soul who loved riding horses, camping, and above all, caring for her children, and was known by her friends and neighbors for her vibrant spirit. However, all of that was tragically taken from her in August of 1996. Valerie was discovered deceased, surrounded by blood, and suffering from multiple stab wounds. Notably, she was found in a residence at the Courtyard Apartments on King Street in the neighborhood of Riverside, Jacksonville. Her corpse was discovered after an alarm was raised by her neighbors when her daughters reached out to them and revealed that their mom was missing. An investigation revealed that the person who actually owned the apartment had been arrested just a day before and placed behind bars for an unrelated crime. But if the owner of the apartment had such a rock-solid and bulletproof alibi, how did Valerie get into the house on that ill-fated day? The arrested owners said that the place had been left unlocked when he was taken away. Apart from the killer who had stabbed and badly beaten Valerie, the murder weapon was also missing. However, the Jacksonville Police Department found over 30 pieces of evidence in the apartment that they hoped would help them hunt the attacker down. Although the cops worked hard to investigate all the evidence, the technology of 1996 didn't allow them the edge they needed to expose the murderer. As a result, the case was filed among other cold cases, and the evidence was stored away in hopes of future use. With the police unable to make progress, Valerie's children had to endure their pain and grow up without their mother's loving presence. The murder of Valerie Ames was still unsolved in a corner of the Jacksonville Police Archives in 2018. In the same year, however, it saw the resurgence of the 500-page case file at the request of Valerie's daughters. Detective Harmony Brooks and her team revealed that they had reopened the case and were confident in finding the killer now.
Right now what we're concentrating on is the evidence inside the crime scene and the fact that we're 22 years later with greater DNA technology.
The case was 22 years old at this point. Forensic technology had also evolved in this time. Detective Brooks spoke to First Coast News and assisted the channel in releasing a cold case documentary on Valerie Ames. She said that there were over 30 pieces of evidence found at the crime scene that day, and that would now be tested with modern equipment to hunt Valerie's killer down. The police found some breadcrumbs to follow. Slowly, the Jacksonville police pieced several things together and made use of new advanced DNA testing methods in the hopes of identifying the killer. The 22-year delay did pose several challenges, but detectives were determined to catch the killer this time. Finally, in April of 2024, the police discovered the breakthrough they needed, 6 years after reopening the case from 1996. On April 2, 2024, the Jacksonville Police Department announced they had made an arrest in the Valerie Ames homicide case. The suspect, 69-year-old Jerry Phillips. He was apprehended after almost 28 years. The announcement was made by Jacksonville Police Sheriff T.K. Waters at a press conference. Sheriff Waters addressed the media, reaffirming public confidence in police efforts and highlighting the diligent work of detectives on every case. The apprehended suspect was arrested in Johnston County, North Carolina, and charged with the murder of Valerie Ames. It was disclosed that the perpetrator was not a random stranger to Valerie. Despite the questions of the media, Sheriff Waters didn't reveal what exactly led them to Phillips, but said he was happy to finally find him. Phillips was charged with sexual battery and second-degree murder, which says that Valerie's murder wasn't premeditated, but circumstantial. This further leads to the question of what exactly happened to the 31-year-old. It also raises the question of whether Jerry was the only person involved in this. Michelle James, the younger daughter of Valerie Ames, who was only 5 at the time of her killing, also made a media appearance after the arrest of Phillips. Michelle, who had only a handful of photographs to keep her mom alive in her heart, expressed both joy and anger when her old wound was reopened. She expressed that her family had been eagerly waiting to see justice served for Valerie.
My grandmother had to live the rest of her life knowing she buried her daughter.
The Valerie Ames case is still ongoing, and more elements will soon be revealed, following which Jerry Phillips will also face a court trial. Although all those 28 years of struggle can't be reversed, Michelle and her family can now breathe a little easier. On December 20th, 1987, a horrifying discovery unfolded near Royal Palm Beach, Florida. A resident walking his dog along the intersection of 130th Avenue and 72 Road North stumbled upon the remains of an unknown woman near a stand of trees. Abandoned on the sandy patch, the body was unclothed. The resident immediately contacted the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office, or PBCSO, who arrived at the scene shortly after, alongside the county medical examiner. Officers were confused by the discovery, which led them to look for the woman's identity and the reason behind her terrible death. Who was she? and what horrific events could have brought her to this secluded patch of land. Deputies cordoned off the area and looked around after the incident, but they were unable to locate any clothing or evidence that would have helped identify the deceased woman. There was no jewelry on the corpse or in the immediate surrounding area. The coroner thought that the body had been out in the weather for quite a bit of time. Her body was taken away from the scene and placed in the county morgue for a further examination. Later, when the coroner performed an autopsy, they assessed her age to be between her late 20s and late 30s. The mystery woman, whose height was estimated to be 5 feet 3 inches, had light brown hair with gray streaks, according to an investigation of her remains. In addition, it was found that she had 8 teeth fillings, which was evidence of major dental work. They discovered while examining the bone structure that she might have had a fracture to her right collarbone, severe arthritis, or a back injury. The case was categorized as suspected homicide, even though the cause of death was unknown. Additionally, the coroner calculated that she had been dead for a minimum of a year prior to her finding. She was identified as a Jane Doe, as there was no way to identify her. When investigators compared their Jane Doe case to those of other missing persons, they were unable to locate anything remotely similar to a location where she had been found. Although the case was still ongoing, the police's few leads finally dried up. In 2005, the PBSO created a DNA profile of their Jane Doe by using the traditional method of short tandem repeat testing, or STR testing, thanks to technological advancements. The Combined DNA Index System, or CODIS, of the Federal Bureau of Investigation received a DNA profile after the attempt, which was successful despite the age of the bones. A digital forensic sketch of the woman's possible appearance was created using the markers from the DNA profile, and it was shared with the media to encourage the public to provide leads. Following the release of the woman's digital image, several leads had been received. These, however, turned out to have nothing to do with the Jane Doe case. Despite their best efforts, investigators were unable to identify the woman, and by the mid-2000s, the case had become cold once more. The Jane Doe was identified as UP-1213 when the case details were uploaded to NamUs, the National Missing and Unidentified Persons Database. The case remained unsolved for the following 30 years until 2023. Senator Jennifer Bradley, along with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, helped secure funding for the county to formally reopen investigations into cases involving unidentified human remains. This made it possible for the PBSCO to work with the Texas-based Othram Labs in September of 2023. Through the use of forensic-grade genome sequencing, Othram scientists were able to create a thorough DNA profile. They compared the profile to the genetic genealogy bank they built up throughout time. This produced more leads, and a match was found between Jane Doe and a Nashville, Tennessee resident who was 38 years old. Investigators contacted the woman Jessica Rust and asked for a DNA sample so they could compare it to Jane Doe's. Strong matches between the DNA samples point to a parent-child link between Jessica and Jane Doe. After speaking with Jessica, investigators discovered more about her relationship with Jane Doe. Then, on February 5, 2024, the Palm Beach County Jane Doe finally had a name and a story.
For more than 30 years, detectives were unable to identify the woman, but new funding allowed them to revisit that case and identify her as Pati Lisa Rust. She's believed to have lived in that area of Lauderdale by the Sea in the late 1980s.
It was Pati Lisa Loguercio Rust. Elizabeth English and Anthony Loguercio welcomed Pati into the world in Florida in 1960. Anthony and Stephen were her brothers' names. She got married to Kenneth Allen Rust on November 11, 1984, and gave birth to her daughter Jessica not long after. The family resided in Florida's Broward County at Lauderdale by the Sea. However, Pati had vanished into thin air in 1986. Despite the best efforts of her friends and family, she was never discovered and ended up being added to the system as another missing person. Thanks to developments in forensic technology, Pati's family was able to find the closure they had been waiting for 37 long years. After learning that her mother was the Jane Doe discovered in Palm Beach in 1987, Jessica, who runs her own YouTube channel called Rust on the Road, documented the painful journey.
Literally about to put on some pants and some shoes and head down to the Nashville Metropolitan Police Department because they said that there was a hit on a genealogy report for me and the location of Pati Lisa Rust, which is my mom. So it's just crazy to think about how long of a journey this has been. I think I cried out most of it, and then like getting rained on like quelled me a little bit. And when I was sitting in the lobby for like waiting for the detectives to come get me, I was sitting on the bench and I almost started crying again, and then there was like this break in the clouds and like the sun just shone directly on me. When people asked me about my family, and I would have to kind of like skirt around it and be like, my mom went missing when I was little and nothing ever came of it. I don't know. It was so confusing to people, and they would ask so many questions that I didn't have the answers to. And like I just accepted that after a while, right? Like what can you do? Like you can't drive yourself crazy trying to like find answers. Like that's just not how the world works. And it's such a hard thing to process because I know we're all in a lot of pain and it's a lot of shock for everyone today. And like, again, I hate being the steward of that. But I'm just very grateful to still have them and to have been able to facilitate that today. So again, we're going to close out the day in a very positive light and just be grateful I'm surrounded by people that love me and loved my mom.
Since they believe foul play may have played a role in Pati's death, the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office has kept up its investigation. Investigators are still looking for anyone who may have seen or knew Pati in the months before her death, since the case is still open. Call 561-688-4063 to reach investigator John Cogburn if you have any information. On April 29, 2017, a local man ventured to the Neosho River to witness the aftermath of recent heavy rains. As he stood on the riverbank, something unusual caught his eye in the grass. Stepping closer, his heart pounded as he realized what he had found. It was a human skull. He immediately called the police, and within moments, Lyon County Sheriff's deputies rushed to the 2000 block of Road 145 on the city's west side. Despite their best efforts, the police struggled for years to identify the victim, now known as the Neosho River's John Doe. Trapped by the shocking revelation, the public started calling the victim the skull found on the riverbank. Though more remains were discovered, the mystery of the Neosho Rapids riverside remained frustratingly mysterious. How did the skull come to rest in the Neosho River? And more hauntingly, who was the Neosho River's John Doe? The Lyon County Sheriff's officers were a little taken aback when a man reported finding a skull laying on the banks of the Neosho River. The cops processed the situation right away as they arrived. A sizable garbage bag was discovered by investigators 20 feet or so from the skull. There was a comforter and a fitted sheet in the bag. These materials had been used to wrap a digital watch and other human remains. Although the garbage bag was found shredded along the edges, it was knotted tight at the top. According to the case report, animals had likely torn it in an attempt to get at the bones. Following their survey of the scene and determination that no additional evidence needed to be processed, the autopsy and forensic analysis were scheduled for later. Detectives concluded that the case was a homicide, even though the autopsy was unable to identify the cause of death. The intervention of the forensic anthropologist helped to clarify the situation. The researchers discovered that the bones belonged to a male, who was potentially mixed race, possibly Caucasian and African American. The test also concluded that the bones belonged to a male with long hair, roughly 6 to 8 inches long. That was either blonde, gray, or white. At the time of his death, the man who stood 5 feet 5 inches tall belonged to the medium to late age group. The unidentified man's spine was found to have a sideways bend, indicating that he had scoliosis. Afterwards, forensics determined that he had passed away sometime between 2013 and 2016. Other than this information, nothing else surfaced in relation to the man who remained anonymous. His digital wristwatch was registered as his clothes, and his case file was called John Doe. Who was John Doe of the Neosho River? How did he pass away? For months after the remains of John Doe were found in the Neosho River in August of 2017, the police assembled the case files and added number UP16928 to the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. But despite their best efforts, the investigators were unable to identify the John Doe of the Neosho River. The case was sent to the FBI's lab in Quantico, Virginia, at some point in 2018, so that DNA could be examined. However, despite this, no progress was made, and his true identity, sadly, remained a mystery. In 2022, Othram and the Lyon County Sheriff's Office collaborated to see if modern forensic DNA testing might be used to identify their John Doe. The Othram forensic scientists were able to create a thorough DNA profile for the missing man. The profile was then used by Othram's internal forensic genetic genealogy team to produce fresh investigation leads, which were afterwards forwarded to the Lyons County Sheriff's Office. The Lyons County Sheriff's deputies returned to work with the fresh leads that forensic genealogy offered. The detectives were able to track down a possible relative of John Doe from the Neosho River throughout the course of their follow-up inquiry. Their decision to stay anonymous prevented them from ever providing more information about who this relative was. Additional DNA testing conducted on this possible relative established that the John Doe was Randy Bruce Clayton, a man born on October 12, 1953. Clayton was an Oklahoman who was originally from the Phoenix region. Detective Sergeant Travis Mishler of the Lyons County Sheriff's Office spoke to the public regarding the facts that could be disclosed about the late Randy Bruce Clayton. Randy was never reported missing, he clarified, although he did not say where Randy had been seen recently. While Randy's cause of death is still uncertain, the Othram website listed him as a victim of homicide. The Lyon County Sheriff's Office extended gratitude to Othram, DNASolves.com, the FBI, NamUs, and the Lyon County Attorney's Office for their contribution to Clayton's identification in a news statement. Even though Randy's murder case is still unsolved, the fact that he was eventually identified has restored hope to many families. 7 years passed before his identity was ultimately revealed. In an interview, Othram's Director of Operations, Colby Lasayan, stressed the value of financing and advocacy. The average cost of processing a case is $7,500, which is typically met by crowdsourcing. The Lyon County Sheriff's Office covered the majority of Randy's costs. Since the homicide investigation is still continuing, no further information regarding Randy's case has been made public. The detectives have also withheld the identities of the family members they spoke with. The community's assistance is required in this case, as well as the efforts of the Lyon County Sheriff's Office to solve it. It has been suggested that anyone with information regarding this case Get in touch with the Lyon County Sheriff's Office via email at sheriff@lyoncounty.org or by calling 620-341-4380. Marina is a small, close-knit city in Monterey County, California. As of 2020, it had a population of 22,359. Known for its friendly community, Marina is the kind of place where everyone knows each other. The city's coastline is unique because it remains undeveloped, protecting rare species like butterflies, buckwheat, and sea lettuce. Living in Marina meant enjoying a quiet, safe environment with a strong sense of community. The city is also known for its forward-thinking plans to adapt to climate change and sea level rise. Koski Drive, where Helga, DeShon, and Uicha Malgieri lived, is a street with townhomes typical of Marina's cozy residential areas. No one expected such a tight-knit and peaceful town to be the site of two shocking murders that would haunt its residents for decades. In 1979, a tragic series of events unfolded in the quiet town of Marina, California. Two young women, Helga DeShon and Uicha Malgieri, had recently moved to the U.S. with their military husbands, who were stationed at Fort Ord. They lived in apartments across from each other on Koski Drive. Uicha from Korea resided at 205 Koski Drive, while Helga from Germany lived at 204 Koski Drive. Both women were murdered just 15 days apart.
Tragically, both victims were young wives of military soldiers, and in both cases, they had been recently married to their husbands. One was a 27-year-old Korean woman by the name of Uicha Malgieri. The other one was a German lady by the name of Helga DeShon. She was only 22 years of age.
Uicha was found strangled to death in her apartment on September 25, 1979. Helga met the same fate on October 9, 1979. The similarities between the two cases were chilling. Both women were strangled and assaulted shortly after their husbands left for the base in the morning. The murders turned the once peaceful apartments into a site of horror and sorrow, leaving the tight-knit community of Marina in shock. This was a place where military families felt safe and secure, but these stark crimes shattered that sense of security, leaving a dark cloud over the town for decades. Paul DeShon came home for lunch one day to find his new bride Helga had been murdered. This horrifying discovery added an even more personal and tragic dimension to the case. Despite initial suspicions, both husbands were quickly cleared of any involvement in the crimes. Detectives launched a thorough investigation, going door to door in search of witnesses who might have seen or heard anything unusual. The police faced a difficult task, as there were few leads and no clear suspects. The community of Marina was deeply shaken by these stark murders. Residents were left wondering, who could have committed such heinous acts in their peaceful town? The investigation would stretch on for decades, with the cases remaining unsolved and casting a long shadow over the lives of those who lived on Koski Drive. Jern Norris, a former resident of Marina, California, emerged as the prime suspect in the 1979 murders of DeShon and Malgieri. Norris, who was 25 at the time, had a troubled history that raised many red flags. Earlier that year, in May, he had been discharged from the Army for attacking and strangling another soldier in Germany. The female soldier survived and identified Norris as her attacker, leading to his bad conduct discharge. After his discharge, Norris returned to the United States and settled in Marina, because his wife, also an Army sergeant, was stationed at Fort Ord. Norris was first flagged as a suspect when a neighbor of Malgieri reported a disturbing encounter with him on August 21, 1979. Norris showed up at her apartment while her husband was at work, asking if he could come in and wait until noon. Once inside, he made several inappropriate comments, including suggesting that she could be a nude model. The neighbor found his behavior unsettling and noted his license plate number as he left. Just a few days later, on August 25, 1979, Norris's violent tendencies resurfaced when he attacked his own wife with an ice pick. Despite the severity of the attack, she survived, and Norris fled the scene. He went to the same neighbor's house and asked for her husband's money, which further alarmed her. On September 25, 1979, Uicha Malgieri was found strangled in her apartment on Koski Drive. Initially, her husband was arrested for the crime, but was later released and cleared of any involvement. 2 weeks later, on October 9, 1979, DeShon was found strangled to death in her apartment, also on Koski Drive. Both women being young military spouses from different countries, both living on Koski Drive, and both being strangled on Tuesday mornings while their husbands were at work, led the police to connect the two murders. On November 11th, Norris escalated his violent behavior when he kidnapped his wife on the way to a marriage counseling appointment. He threatened to kill her, but eventually returned to their home without harming her. In December of 1979, Norris was sentenced to 180 days in jail for stabbing his wife, with 60 days suspended. However, on January 8, 1980, Norris shot his wife multiple times. Remarkably, she survived the shooting, and Norris was convicted of assault with intent to commit murder, resulting in a federal prison sentence. Despite Norris's violent history and suspicious behavior, the technology of the time made it difficult to conclusively tie him to the murders of DeShon and Malgieri. DNA testing and other advanced forensic methods were not available, and the physical evidence collected was inconclusive. The case remained unsolved, leaving a shadow over the Marina community for decades. The neighbor's account of her interactions with Norris provided a crucial context for investigators. On the day of Helga DeShon's murder, the neighbor received a call from someone believed to be Norris, who told her that her best friend had just been killed, even though she did not know DeShon personally. Norris ominously told the neighbor that she was next. This threat, along with his previous behavior, painted a chilling picture of Norris as a dangerous individual. Despite the strong circumstantial evidence, there wasn't enough to convict Norris of the murders at the time. The community was left in fear and mourning, with many wondering how such a violent person could be in their midst. The murders of Helga DeShon and Uicha Malgieri became infamous in Marina, symbolizing a loss of innocence for the small town. As the years went by, the murders of Helga DeShon and Uicha Malgieri turned into a cold case. Though the community of Marina never forgot the tragic events, the investigation hit a standstill. The police kept the case open, hoping that advances in forensic technology would one day provide new clues. Norris, who had spent years in prison for other violent crimes, stayed a prime suspect. His history of attacking women and his presence in Marina during the murders made him a strong candidate. The Marina Police Department never gave up. They kept searching for leads, hoping to find something that would crack the case. The detectives followed up on every tip and revisited old evidence with new techniques. However, despite their efforts, the case remained unsolved, leaving the families and the community in a state of limbo. Residents lived with the fear that the killer was still out there, and the case turned into a chilling reminder of the violence that had struck their peaceful town. Years turned into decades, and the case files gathered dust. Yet the memory of Helga DeShon and Uicha Malgieri remained vivid in the minds of those who knew them. The police and the community held on to the hope that someday Someone would come forward with the information needed to bring the murderer to justice. After years of uncertainty, a recent breakthrough in DNA technology finally identified the perpetrator of the murders. DNA testing was performed on evidence from both crime scenes by the Serological Research Institute in Richmond and Estrella Forensics in Santa Cruz. This analysis provided strong support that Norris was involved in the murders. DNA found on Mrs. DeShon's jeans matched Norris, and a hair found in the DeShon apartment was identified as his. Furthermore, Norris could not be excluded as a contributor to the DNA found on Mrs. Malgieri's underwear. The district attorney's office concluded that there was enough evidence to prove Norris was the murderer. However, Norris had been suffering from severe mental health issues for decades. When he was released from federal prison in 1990, he was civilly committed under a federal law because his release was considered a substantial risk to others due to his mental illness. Since 2002, Norris had been held in a secure medical center for federal prisoners. The Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment stops states from putting on trial or convicting defendants who are not mentally fit. To be considered fit, a defendant must be able to talk with their lawyer and understand the trial. In California, if a defendant charged with a serious crime is found not fit for trial, they can't be kept for more than 2 years, while experts try to make them fit. If after 2 years the defendant is still not fit, the case must be dropped. After a thorough review of Norris's records and interviews with him by members of the Cold Case Task Force and Marina Police Department, the district attorney's office determined that Norris would not be found competent to stand trial. He had multiple mental health disorders and was considered gravely mentally ill. Therefore, the district attorney's office could not file criminal charges against Norris for the murders. However, if Norris's mental state were to improve significantly, the case could be reconsidered. In January of 2022, the Monterey County District Attorney's Office Cold Case Task Force received a $535,000 grant from the U.S. Department of Justice. The grant, titled FY 2021 Prosecuting Cold Cases Using DNA, aimed to support forensic testing and investigations in cold cases where a suspect's DNA had been identified. This funding enabled the Cold Case Task Force to conduct further analysis in the cases of DeShon and Malgieri. With this new DNA evidence and the support from the grant, investigators were able to confirm that Norris was the murderer. Despite this breakthrough, justice for Helga DeShon and Uicha Malgieri remained out of reach due to Norris's mental incompetence. The community of Marina, though relieved to have answers, still grappled with the reality that the person responsible for the heinous crimes could not be held accountable in court. On April 30th, 2024, in Salinas, California, Monterey County District Attorney Janine M. Pacchioni and Marina Police Department Chief Randy Hopkins announced that Jern Laverne Norris, age 69, and a former resident of Marina, was identified as the murderer of Helga DeShon and Uicha Malgieri. Prosecutors in Monterey, California said that if Norris were mentally competent to stand trial, they would have enough evidence to file charges against him. However, Norris is gravely mentally ill and is being indefinitely held in a federal facility. According to the district attorney's office, there is little chance he will ever be fit to stand trial. As a result, the district attorney's office announced they cannot file charges against Norris for the killings. They added that in the extremely unlikely event that Norris's mental state improved substantially, the case could be reconsidered. Currently, Norris is under federal civil commitment in another state. He is being supervised and has been receiving inpatient mental health treatment in a locked facility for decades. Family members of the victims have mixed emotions. While the pain of losing their loved ones remains, they find some relief knowing the person responsible has been identified. Detectives also feel a sense of accomplishment and closure after years of hard work. The Cold Case Task Force is grateful to all who assisted in bringing a resolution to these offenses, and those who continue to honor the memories of Uicha Malgieri and Helga DeShon, said prosecutors. Although the families cannot bring back their loved ones, identifying the murderer gives them some sense of closure. The community can now reflect on the events of 45 years ago and move forward with the truth finally revealed. As we conclude this gripping case, do you think closure was truly achieved for the families of Helga DeShon and Uicha Malgieri? What do you think the community can learn from such tragic events? On April 1, 1986, 37-year-old Wayne D. Heath and his friend went out for a fishing trip by the South Fork of the Snake River, near the Palisades Dam near Bonneville County, Idaho. They were expecting a fun gathering, unaware of the tragic fate that awaited. Only one of them would make it back home. Now the lingering questions were, what exactly occurred to Wayne Heath and his friend? Did anything ominous happen to them? Wayne D. Heath was born on September 3, 1949, in Pocatello, Idaho. He aspired to serve in the Army. On July 31, 1967, he married Wanda Mendenhall. The following year, in 1968, Wayne joined the Army after graduating from Highland High School in Pocatello. He then served as a helicopter mechanic in Vietnam and earned several awards during his service. After he completed his service in the military, Wayne moved in with Wanda and lived a happy family life in Pocatello, raising their 3 children. Everything was going smooth until he made the decision to go on a fishing trip with his friend. On that fateful day, everything seemed fine, until fate took a tragic turn. Only his friend returned home safely, leaving unanswered questions. He then explained what had happened on the boat and why he was worried about where Wayne was. His friend explained that while they had been fishing, the boat's propeller had suddenly become tangled up in a rope, causing the boat to start filling with water. In a desperate attempt to survive, they jumped into the water and swam to shore in the rushing river. Somehow, he managed to reach the shore, but tragically, Wayne did not. However, he had not witnessed Wayne's disappearance, so wasn't sure of whether Wayne had drowned or simply been washed downstream. After that day, Wayne never returned home. This made his family anxious. Without any delay, Bonneville County Sheriff's Office initiated a search, but no trace of Wayne was found. After much effort, they found a witness who reported that Wayne had disappeared roughly a quarter of a mile downstream. Unfortunately, despite this information, authorities could not find any leads in the case. As time went by, there were no new developments in this case, leaving Wayne's family in oblivion. However, the case went cold for years, lingering unsolved answers. Surprisingly, in 2009, something unexpected happened, opening a new door for some closure. 23 years later, in June of 2009, a significant discovery was made when a local resident found a human tibia on a sandbar while fishing in the Snake River near Hecht, Jefferson County. The bone was handed over to law enforcement and sent to the University of Texas for further investigation. The university researchers eventually extracted sufficient DNA to establish a genetic profile. In January of 2013, this genetic information was included in the Unidentified Human Remains Index of the Combined DNA Index System, or CODES. However, despite these efforts, no match was found, and the identity remained unknown for the next 11 years. Finally, in February of 2024, the Bonneville County Sheriff's Office received a notification from UNT researchers confirming the identification of the tibia. With the help of advanced DNA genealogy, the researchers had taken samples from Wayne's biological son, which confirmed the identity of unknown DNA found on the bone. On April 1st, 2024, exactly 38 years later since the incident happened, Wayne's daughter, Nicole Heath, received a call from law enforcement of Idaho Cold Cases, informing her that her father's remains had been identified.
I always dreamed you'd come to the door and say hi, but it didn't work out that way for us.
The Bonneville County Sheriff's Office credited the advanced technology, as well as officers included in this case, to the discovery of Wayne Heath's whereabouts. But the cause of his death remains unsolved. He might have drowned accidentally. This brought closure and answers to Wayne's family, finally resolving his decades-old cold case. At the end, Nicole, Wayne's daughter, shared her emotions in an interview.
Now I have more closure. I know where he is. I know him and my mom are together again.
On November 27, 1988, a simple missed phone call led to a chilling discovery. Robert Hecht never missed his usual Sunday phone call with his sister. But on that day, he didn't answer. Concerned, his sister called the authorities to check on him at his home on Rio Tagus Road in Punta Gorda, Florida. 2 days later, on November 29th, their fears were tragically confirmed. 58-year-old Robert was found murdered in his own home. What started as a quiet day turned into a horrifying scene. The investigation took a long journey. Unfortunately, the case went cold for nearly 30 years. Just when it seemed all hope was lost, there was a breakthrough. What ultimately led to solving the mystery of who was responsible for Robert Hecht's murder, and why?
A Florida cold case more than 30 years old, now connecting back to a city in North Carolina. Officials now bringing their investigation to Lenore after 58-year-old Robert Hecht was found dead in his Florida residence in 1988.
When the police arrived at the crime scene, they noticed the scene itself was terrifying. Robert lay lifeless on the couch, and there was a heavy glass ashtray next to him, covered in blood.
By the use of an ashtray, a big heavy ashtray that was found in the house.
Throughout the investigation, it was discovered that Robert had been struck in the head several times. It was clear that the ashtray was the murder weapon, but there were no signs of a fight. This meant Robert was likely surprised or attacked from behind. He was found dead a few days after November 27, 1988, when he missed his sister's phone call. In addition to the weapon, the police discovered another clue at the scene of the crime.
Found on the back of his leg was a burnt matchstick and a cigarette butt on the floor.
A single cigarette butt, with potentially big implications on this case. But there was something even more concerning. Robert's brand new Lincoln Town Car was missing. It disappeared completely, adding another layer of mystery to this already puzzling case. As investigators dug deeper, they tried to trace Robert's movements before the murder. Witnesses claimed to have seen him on the evening of November 26th, just a day before his death. But there was a new person with him, a man named Ray, described as a white man with a southern accent. He was unfamiliar to Robert's acquaintances. The information about Ray was vague. He said he was from Tennessee and Kentucky, and he had separated from his wife and was living with his 14-year-old daughter. The involvement of this new person, Ray, became more suspicious. Could he have played a role in Robert's murder? Investigators traced Robert's final movements before his death. He was seen with Ray at the Fisherman's Village Oyster Bar in Punta Gorda on the evening of the 26th. Robert had mentioned plans to visit another bar with Ray before going home. This provided a clear timeline and location for Robert's last hours. But Ray remained elusive. His identity was the biggest obstacle in the case. The search for answers went beyond Charlotte County. Then a crucial breakthrough arrived. On November 28, 1988, the police discovered new leads in a nearby town called Lenore. A man was spotted leaving a store and ditching Robert's stolen car, the Lincoln he'd just bought a month ago. It had been left abandoned on Main Street in Lenore, North Carolina, over 700 miles from Punta Gorda. This unexpected discovery not only confirmed the theft of the car, but also suggested a potential escape route for the perpetrator. The car, now in the possession of the Lenore police, became a crucial piece of evidence that could contain important clues. Following the trail of the recovered Lincoln, crime scene investigators meticulously examined the vehicle. Their search uncovered a significant piece of evidence: a single cigarette butt. That cigarette butt was assumed belonged to the theft. The cigarette butts in the car were significant evidence because Robert had a strict rule of no smoking in his car. He never smoked in it himself or allowed anyone else to do so. And this suggested that the cigarette likely wasn't from Robert, but rather a potential breadcrumb left behind by the killer. The investigation was about to take another turn, just as detectives were digging deeper. A new witness came forward, claiming they saw a blonde woman in the passenger seat of the stolen car. This threw the whole investigation for a loop. Who was this woman? Was the blonde woman just a random passenger, or was there more to her presence? Detectives tirelessly interviewed witnesses, searching for any inconsistencies that might lead them to the truth. As days turned into weeks, pressure grew from the media. But the Charlotte County Sheriff's Office remained tight-lipped. The lack of a clear motive, the mysterious Ray, and the sudden appearance of the blonde woman hinted that the crime might have been planned, but went wrong. Robert's family felt deep sadness as their Sunday tradition turned into silence. With no new leads and few clues, the case eventually went cold. But one question lingered in the investigation. Would they ever find Robert's killer? Years went by with the Robert Hecht case remaining unsolved, but hope was revived in September of 2021. Determined to crack the decades-old mystery, Charlotte County cold case detectives re-examined every detail. Investigators gave priority to interviewing witnesses, especially those who could provide information about the elusive Ray. During the initial investigation, details emerged about Ray claiming to be from Tennessee and Kentucky, and being separated with a daughter was just a minimum information. Limitations in technology at the time hindered progress in the investigation. This seemingly normal information wasn't enough to narrow down the suspect pool, but it held the key to unlocking the truth in 2021. With advancements in DNA technology, the cold case detectives saw renewed hope. In September of 2021, the evidence was reevaluated. Both cigarette butts were submitted for DNA analysis. To the detectives' surprise, they discovered that DNA from the same person was present on both cigarettes. This discovery was monumental. It confirmed that the person who attacked Robert in his home and stole his car was the same person. But a crucial element remained missing: an identity for this DNA profile. The detectives, with renewed determination, searched the Combined DNA Index System, a national database for DNA profiles, but their search found no results. This meant the perpetrator wasn't linked to any previous criminal activity. Then they took the investigation a step further by submitting the results for genealogical examination. This innovative technique uses DNA to trace an individual's ancestry, potentially leading to matches with relatives within a database. But it was a risk. It offered a path forward where traditional methods had failed. But the risk paid off. A match was discovered. It belonged to a family member from Tennessee. With this new profound discovery, a geological connection was established. Detectives conducted interviews, studied family trees, and made direct comparisons with family members. This discovery, combined with information about Ray's 14-year-old daughter, eventually led them to identify the man they had been searching for, Kenneth Ray Miller, who was 36 years old when Robert Hecht was murdered. The revelation of Ray Miller's name sent shockwaves through the investigation. Witness interviews were conducted once again, this time with photographs of Ray in hand, and the results were chilling. Those who had previously encountered Ray on that fateful evening of November 26, 1988, positively identified him from the photographs. The identification wasn't the only bombshell dropped by the witnesses. After seeing Ray's image, one witness disclosed further details. They had not only seen Ray with Robert on the evening of November 26th, but had also spotted him in Robert's home the following morning, November 27th, after the crime. This proved that Ray wasn't just an acquaintance. He appeared to be comfortable enough to spend the night at Robert's residence. The witness described seeing him draped on the end of the living room couch, the same couch where Robert's lifeless body was later found. However, a cruel twist of fate emerged. When detectives looked deeper into Kenneth Ray Miller, they found that he had passed away in 2007, at the age of 55, of natural causes. This identification brought a sense of closure, but it also left a void. The unanswered questions surrounding Robert's final moments and the motive behind the murder. Despite this setback, the investigation continued, and a background check on Ray revealed a disturbing truth. A past filled with violent crimes. Aggravated crimes such as battery, burglary, arson, these were just a few of the offenses that were a part of his history. This violent streak painted a chilling portrait of the man who had spent his final hours with Robert. On March 22, 2024, after a relentless pursuit of justice spanning over 3 decades, the Charlotte County Sheriff's Office Cold Case Unit officially closed the case. The closure, however, was bittersweet, with the blonde woman not being found and the killer not alive to face justice. It was a closure by the death of the offender. Even after decades, advancements in technology and the relentless pursuit of truth can bring closure to families yearning for answers. Though the mystery may not be fully solved, the identification of Kenneth Ray Miller ensures that Robert Hecht's family has some peace.